Morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you all have probably gathered, there are a variety of clocks in this building, and none of them say the same time. However, by an average of the clocks that I've seen over the last few minutes, it does appear now to be 9:30, the appointed time to begin this session. So I will open it. My name is Rhyn Smith. I have been appointed on behalf of the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government to examine the Tunbridge Wells Allocations local plan. If I can introduce to my left Lynette Duncan, who is the Programme Officer for this examination. I'm sure nearly everybody in this room in some capacity or other has either seen her name on the website or has been in electronic or phone communication with her. She is responsible for all of the administration and management of the process that delivers these hearings. But nevertheless, if there are matters that you need to clarify about how this examination works and you need somebody to speak to at any point today, during the breaks or at lunch, please do introduce yourself to Lynette in person. I will also just briefly check, do we have anyone here from Shepway Council? Not yet. We do. Well, I will introduce Isabel Hills and Beth Lennon. They're both Shepway officers. Both are trainee planners, and Ms. Hills' first role in that respect is as a programme officer for another examination that I'm appointed to as inspector. They requested PINs that there would be a possibility that they could attend these sessions on a training basis. Now, the reason I'm introducing them is because, as many in this room will be aware, inspectors do not normally speak privately to attendees at any examination during the breaks or lunchtime for very obvious reasons. However, if you see me in conversation with either of these two folk from Shepway, it is essentially around the training purpose of their attendance today. So hopefully that's transparent. What I intend to do this morning, because I'm conscious that there are very many attendees today in comparison with some of the sessions that we've had, and that quite a lot of the attendees are people who have not previously attended an examination session, is to introduce the Council and the people who will be speaking today after I've made some initial observations about the venue and the hearing arrangements. Now, I would like to thank Tunbridge Wells Council for this venue. We've made arrangements to sit in the council chamber today to ensure that there is sufficient space for members of the public, particularly who want to observe this session. If we find ourselves short of seating, and it looks as though there's a slight possibility that that might happen, I'm told there is more seating available in the public gallery, and so if there are people, as we move through the morning, who need to be seated additionally, could I ask the Council if somebody could escort them to the staircase so that they can be taken into the public gallery? The downside, ladies and gentlemen, of using this venue is that this session must close by, I gather, 4 p.m, although there may be a little scope to extend to 4:30. Is that possible, Mr. Toft?
Yes, I just need to check with the town hall keepers. I wasn't able to track them down, but I'll do that at the first break. But okay, I think there may be a bit of leeway at the end of the day. So.
But in any case, 4:30 would be an absolute hard deadline. I would like everybody, if there's anybody here who will be speaking this afternoon, I'd like that to be borne in mind. There's no hearing on Friday, the 4th, or Monday, the 7th of December, and after today's hearings, the examination will return to session on Tuesday, the 8th of December, and we'll move back across the corridor to committee rooms A and B, where we've been more typically located, and that session will open at 10 a.m. Toilets, if you require them. Ladies' toilets are simple. Through either door to my left or my right, you will go into the lobby outside the council chamber. There is a ladies' cloakroom, so marked, on the right-hand side of the lobby, and that is where the ladies' toilets are. Gents' toilets are a little harder to access. move out of the lobby onto the main landing in front of the grand staircase, turn left into the committee corridor. Halfway down the corridor on your left are the closest gents' toilets. I have been informed that there are no planned fire drills for today, and so if the fire alarm sounds, this is a real event and we need to exit the building. If that occurs, our means of escape are, again, through this pair of double doors to the rear of the chamber, immediately down the grand staircase on either side. There is a front door at the bottom of the staircase. That's your means of escape. The council staff who are here today would then marshal everybody to an assembly area. So those are the arrangements if we need to clear the building. Ladies and gentlemen, you will note that I'm using a microphone. First of all, can I check that I'm sufficiently audible to everybody who needs to hear me? That's very good news. Secondly, this system is actually being used to take a digital audio recording of everything that is being done in this room today. Now, that's something that hasn't typically been done in many local plan examinations before today. It's being tested here. It's probably something that, if it works well, we may find ourselves doing more and more in future. What the council have done is that they have placed the digital audio files via a link on the web pages for this examination. So anybody who wishes to check back on the transactions of the day, or indeed any of the hearing days, fully able to do so on the council's website. In relation to technology as well, you'll see that I don't have the wall of library documents behind me that typically inspectors in local plan examination matters do. And that's because, again, I have all of the documentation associated with this examination available to me electronically, again, via the council's website. So all of that information can also be interrogated online by anybody who's participating in this process. We're trying to be, if not paperless, then at least a little less paper than is typically the case. Now, the arrangements for these hearings are set out in a combination of the programme, which is currently in version 4, and agendas that were issued on the 23rd of November. Does everybody who wishes to have sight of these have them available? That is very good news. We'll be breaking today at approximately 11 a.m. for 15 minutes, and then aiming to break at 1 p.m. for lunch, or earlier if the discussion of the Paddock Wood matter that most people are here for now is complete. We'll resume at 2 p.m. and we will break briefly at 3 p.m. and end, as I've indicated, either at 4 or 4 p.m. depending on whether we have a little latitude. Now, I'm going to say just a little to help those who will be speaking today, because, again, I'm very conscious that there are a number of people who are potentially first-time speakers. Can I just check by way of show of hands from those who are sitting at tables, who's not attended and spoken before? Okay, so quite a number. I will run through perhaps in a little more detail than I normally do, and I will ask for the indulgence of those who have been here on a number of days. Actually, no, just before I do, there's one other question I'll ask. Is there anybody sitting in the back chairs who believes they ought to be speaking this morning, but doesn't have a seat at a front table? Critically important. Yes, sir. Okay, fine. As long as it's a tag team process with somebody who is already at the front, that's excellent. Excellent. Good. Right. So there's nobody sitting there feeling that they're being excluded. That's very, very good news. The examination is of the council's plan. So the council, by definition, is invited to speak on every matter and issue in the agenda. Now, what the version 4 programme aimed to do was to record all requests to be heard from other representors next to the matters where the discussion of their issues was most relevant. Only those representors who have requested to be heard are entitled to speak. So if you haven't requested to be heard, if you're a member of the public here to observe, you're fully entitled to reserve, but you don't have a right to interject. All of the papers that have been provided in advance, whether by the council or by any of the representatives, have been read by me. I trust they've been read by all the other participants, so they can be taken as read. And therefore, what I'll be asking people to do is to move the discussion directly to their key conclusions. And also, as they do so, to take into account not only their own views, but the balance of the submissions and the evidence put by others and the way those submissions and evidence maybe affect their views. Because that's the virtue of an oral hearing. We're here not just to recite what we've already said, we're here to take that further to the next level by taking into account what others have said. What I will normally do is to start the discussion of a matter by seeking involvements from representatives, i.e. not the council, and then I'll move to the council for responses. Where matters are complex, what I sometimes then do is return to representatives for additional observations on the council's position before then providing the council with a final right of reply. And I do that simply because occasionally things change as we're moving along and people feel the need to respond to something that the council has said. Now, if you're a speaker, you will have in front of you a Toblerone. And what I would like you to do is that if you are somebody who is intending to speak on a particular item in the agenda, when I ask for that item of the agenda to commence, if you wish to speak, place your Toblerone on end. If you do that, I have a perfect visual signal that you wish to be included in that round of discussions, and I will ensure that I come to you before that round of discussion is complete. When you have spoken, but before the end of that round of discussions, once you no longer wish to be heard, you place your Toblerone back flat. And again, then you're signalling to me that I can pass on and bring in another participant. If, once you have already spoken, something that another participant says leads you to need to qualify or add to your position, you can, of course, signal again, and I will try and find an appropriate time to bring you in to the discussion. But if I do that, there's no need to reiterate what others have said. It will be sufficient to say, if you agree with something, that you agree with it. Of course, if you disagree, you'll need to explain why. So does everybody have an understanding of the ground rules, how the discussions are going to proceed, roughly? That's good. Right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask for introductions around the table so that you all hear from each other and know why you're here. Now, somewhat differently to previous sessions, we actually have the council in the middle, directly opposite me. I am going to ask the council to introduce themselves first so that you all know who they are. Once they've done that, I'm going to move to my far left with Kent County Council and the other agencies, and I will ask them to introduce themselves, and then I'll move around the rest of the room. So can I have introductions from the council, please?
Good morning, sir. I'm Kelvin Hinton. I'm the Planning Policy Manager with the Borough Council.
My name is Adrian Tofts, and I'm Planning Policy Team Leader with the Borough Council.
Thank you very much. Now, moving to Kent County Council.
Thank you. I'm Vicky Hubert, and I'm a Strategic Transport Planner for KCC.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Peter Waring from Environment Agency, and I work with the Flood Risk Management Department.
Thank you very much.
My name is Susan Solbra. I'm Regional Planning Manager at Southern Water.
Good morning, Mike Tomlinson, Southern Water, Technical Lead.
Thank you very much for those contributions from Southern Water. Upper Medway?
Yep, Pete Dowling, representing the Upper Medway Internal Drainage Board.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ryden Homes.
Mike Newton from Boyer Planning, representing Ryden Homes in connection with the Church Farm site.
Thank you very much.
Andy Meader from Pegasus Group, representing Persimmon Homes, re the Maskell's Court Road site in Paddock.
I think you might, when you speak, need to draw the microphone a little closer to your mouth. Some of them aren't very good.
Good morning, sir. My name is Hugh Edwards, planning partner of Barton Wilmore. I'm here this morning on behalf of Barclays Strategic, also joined by my ecology colleagues and highway colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. Sure that microphone's working. That's better.
Good morning, sir. My name's Ben Kite from Ecological Planning and Research. We're the ecologists retained on behalf of Barclays Strategic.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Simon Young from Glanville Consultants on behalf of Barclays Strategic Land for the Maskell's Farm site.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Miles Young of MRPP, acting on behalf of Tesco, who own interests in Paddock Wood Town Centre.
Thank you very much. Moving across. Mrs. Morris.
Jacqueline Morris, representing the residents of Paddock Wood.
Thank you.
Good morning. David Corse, Paddock Wood resident for over 30 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corse.
Okay.
Apologies. There'll be time to give more detail once we're in the main session.
Elizabeth Aikenhead for the Campaign for Protection of Rural England's Tunbridge Wells District Committee.
Thank you very much, Lady Aikenhead.
Steve Songhurst, I'm the Honorary Warden for Foldhurst Wood, the nature reserve next to one of the sites.
Thank you, Mr. Songhurst.
Good morning, sir. I'm Claire Stewart, representing Paddock Wood Town Council.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, sir. My name's Ray Moon. I'm representing Paddock Wood Labour Party and I've already submitted a personal consultation submission. And as a matter of interest, I'm a Paddock Wood Town Councillor. I'm a Foulhurst Wood volunteer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moon. Okay, now you'll be very pleased to hear that we're going to get started on the proper agenda very, very shortly. However, just before we do, there are one or two preliminary matters, procedural matters that I just want to resolve. Firstly, I'll confirm that accompanied site inspections of the allocations proposed at Paddock Wood PW3 and 4 were carried out on Monday. An unaccompanied site inspection of Foulhurst Wood at Paddock Wood also took place on Monday afternoon in preparation for today. And also, if you look on the website, you'll find that there are records of unaccompanied site inspections that I've also made to the remainder of Paddock Wood, including the town centre and the environs of the town. I want to refer briefly to matter J on the agenda today. That's at the end of the afternoon. This is time provided for follow-up on matters arising from this week's hearings and actions. Firstly, I propose to send a letter this morning confirming the actions arising from Tuesday morning, the 1st of December session on housing land supply and setting dates for the actions to be completed. 11th of December for the Council's initial response. 24th of December for other participants' written reply to the matters raised by the Council, and 8th of January for final comments from the Council. Now, the reason I'm putting that process in place in that form is because that is to be a written procedure now. The matters that were discussed in the hearing there, I don't intend returning for a further hearing. Does anybody have any final observations to make on that process before I send that letter? No. So that will be sent this morning. Now, in relation to the remainder of the action list, I had originally intended that we'd review that this afternoon. However, I had anticipated being able to finalise my notes and check them against delivery in the hearing sessions using the audio files. And whilst the Council has been working very hard to ensure that the audio files are up for the following day, there was one fairly substantial file that took until, I believe, 11 o'clock last night to load. I didn't find it until 11:30 p.m, and so as a consequence I haven't made my final check of my action list. We do have time programmed on Tuesday morning to review the action list, so that's when I propose I will do that. Again, any concerns or observations on that? None. Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they need to ask me or raise about the procedure for today? Nothing. In which case, let us move directly to matter F, the Paddock Wood allocations. Now, if we can move into the agenda, and the first item merely being an observation about the site process that I've reported to you on. The second item is the question as to whether Paddock Wood sites generally can be adequately served by infrastructure. Now, this does draw in matters around access, traffic, etc. But critically, this is the place where flooding and drainage issues that have been raised in relation to that settlement need to be discussed, and I'd like those to be brought out generally before we move to the specifics site by site. So, can I see Toblerones raised from those who believe they'll be participating in this section of the discussion? Everybody. That is not particularly surprising. Now, the way I thought it would be most useful to proceed here would actually be to move initially to community representatives, because there are a considerable number of written representations from community representatives expressing concern, particularly about flooding. I'd like to therefore take flooding first. If you can address flooding first. If there are traffic issues, can you please hold them back, and we'll come to traffic and transportation and access after we've dealt with flooding. Once we have the community issues on the table, I will then come to house builder interests and developer interests, and then I'll come to agencies in terms of adequacy of provision, capacity, ability to upgrade, etc., and then I will come to the council. Everybody content? So, can we start, and I think it's most appropriate to start, with Paddock Wood Town Council. I would then propose to go to Mrs Morris, Mr Corse, and the Paddock Wood Labour Party. Paddock Wood Town Council.
On the flooding issue, specifically initially talking about the Church Farm site, I'd just like to make the point that on the all the flood maps of the area, with the existing situation, however, whether you look at the once in 10 years, once in 30 years, however many times you look at it, flood events, the area, current residential area, i.e. Dimmock Close and the Temple, which is situated to the west of the site, is always shown at risk of flooding. The situation at the moment is that the Church Farm site does act as a functional floodplain and to an extent protects that area from flooding. The Paddock Wood Town Council is not satisfied that any of the mitigation proposals that have so far come forward will reduce the runoff from that site sufficiently to protect those residential areas from flooding, and would anticipate that if that site is built on, those residential areas will flood. And I'm not talking about gardens, I'm talking about houses. There are also flood issues in terms of the Maskell's Court Farm site. Their drainage proposals work on the assumption that the water will be able to drain onto the Church Farm site. Therefore, again, if that is built on, their drainage proposals will be unsuccessful. There are problems on the ground in that the railway line does act as a dam, and the capacity of the culverts under the railways have never been completely assessed. So that's what I would like to say on the flood issues. There are flooding issues on the Maskell's Farm site, particularly the corner of the site that abuts the Maidstone Road, Badsall Road junction, but I understand that there are some proposals there that seem to be thought by the Environment Agency and KCC. It seems to be thought that they will be effective, so perhaps that's already been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Mrs. Morris.
Right. As probably most people are aware, the Church Farm site floods every year. I have numerous photographs and they are available on the website. We also have, we did a survey in which, this is a regular basis, about 30% of the homes in Paddock Wood have surface water flooding in their gardens every winter and spring. And 10% of the homes in Paddock Wood during periods of heavy rain have difficulty flushing their toilets due to the current drainage system. We had a situation in September where they had to bring bowsers in to remove the water from Church Road and Commercial Road because one of the pumping stations failed due to a large volume of surface water. No investigation of the existing drainage system in Paddock Wood has been carried out for over 40 years. So it is difficult to see how it can be said that the system's adequate when we have 30% surface water flooding, 10% with problems with sewage water leaving homes, and also it says I think Tunbridge Wells Borough Council have stated that the developments will bring improvements to the drainage infrastructure. Everything I have seen to date is merely mitigation of the additional surface and foul water that these developments would produce. Thank you.
Now, just to be clear here, and this is responding to a matter that was raised by the Town Council as well, but the sense that I'm getting from your submissions is that the existing situation is of a level of difficulty and seriousness that requires a betterment to be delivered to the benefit of the settlement as a whole, as distinct merely from the management of the drainage issues of individual sites.
That's true, yes. I have serious concerns. I'm also the Paddock Wood flood warden, the only. I believe there might be another one. There's one more. And I have serious concerns that due to our existing problems, that an additional 1,000 homes discharging foul water through the system and the additional runoff will cause extensive flooding in Paddock Wood.
So again, to be clear here, you've got an underlying concern that notwithstanding the various measures that have been proposed, that things would actually get worse.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Can I ask Mr. Corse to contribute, please?
I, like many residents, have very severe concerns about the flooding issues in Paddock Wood. These have been expressed over a number of years to the council, to developers, but they don't seem to take our concerns into account. All the recommendations that have been expressed by the Environment Agency, the Internal Drainage Board, Southern Water, still haven't been taken into account on their planning application. And we're concerned that they're just not being listened to. We've had an important study, the Kent KCC Paddock Wood Flood Alleviation Study, which has looked into the flooding at Paddock Wood, which has made very good recommendations, which ought to be taken into account. But nobody appears to have seen these. Certainly, the Borough Council have noted that they've taken these into account on the DPD, but there's no indication in the DPD where these have been taken into account. So it's fairly evident, I think, that these have not been looked at in any detail.
Thank you very much. Now, I mean, it's trite to observe that we do have the relevant authorities and agencies that you have referred to here. So, when we've heard from community interests and when we've heard from development sector interests, then we will have an opportunity to test.
I can refer to the various letters and emails that these statutory bodies have sent to the Borough Council and to the developers.
Okay.
So you're aware of those.
Well, thank you very much. What I'll suggest we do is that we allow them to get their in-principle response onto the table first, and that we can drill down into the detail to the extent that we need to once we hear their position. Okay. Now, those who've spoken, if you can just... This is semaphore. If you can flick your Toblerones down, then I know where to go next, which is Mr. Moon for Paddock Wood Labour Party.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to make the first point is that we're not against housing for the community in Kent. There's a shortage, but the underlying issue is got to be in the right place and sustainable. And the flooding issue is particularly important for Paddock Wood. We've been asked to accommodate approximately nearly 900 houses, and they are being asked to be built within an existing drainage system, wastewater system, that has not been improved since the 1960s. And in Paddock Wood, we've seen vast new developments. We have not actually actively argued against that until this particular application, because that network system has not been improved, the pipe structure has not been enlarged. So with the threat of these three developments, it poses a tremendous strain on the already restricted culverts that run under the railway. And all drainage, all sewage systems go that way. So whatever development you look at in Paddock Wood, whether it's Church Farm, Green Lane or Badsall Road, they all face the same issue. There is inadequate network to sustain that. Another issue that I think has not been addressed in recent years is actually our climate change. Everyone knows now we're subjected to more heavy bursts of rain in short spurts. That poses an extra increased pressure on our network. And it's not always feasible to keep putting in ponds, holding ponds, in new developments. We seriously consider that we're reaching capacity in Paddock Wood, and the amount of flooding, surface water, in all the areas of Paddock Wood, whether it's Church Farm, Green Lane or Badsall, is already an issue. If you take the area south of the railway, it's already indicated in the SFRA report that the critical part of that is the culverts where they're restricted under the railway. And as I said, PW3 and PW4 all go that way. So all three developments are at risk, wherever you are in Paddock Wood. The national policy indicates that new housing is not built on land subject to flooding. If that logic runs true, then in relation to the allocation, all three sites have flooding issues. Thank you.
Now, I'm actually going to ask an in-principle question that I'm going to direct to each of the contributors who've just spoken before I hand this topic over. And that is to essentially ask that if infrastructure constraints were solved, and particularly the flooding constraint that we're discussing now was solved to reasonable satisfaction, whether in your view the proposals for housing would actually be more appropriate or acceptable or even desirable. I just want to get a Mrs. Morris and then the Town Council.
That's a very interesting question, because if you look at the total investment that would be required to put culverts, new culverts under the railway, considering disruption to the now network rail train service and the capital investment, it would be millions. If you take the infrastructure of the pipes running down Maidstone Road, that all lead to those culverts from all the various developments in Paddock Wood, would require massive investment. And the question is, are the bodies that control that prepared to put that money in? So in the first instance, yes, it would improve it. It would greatly enhance the flood, reduce the flood risk in Paddock Wood. But of grave concerns that all the agencies involved are not prepared to put the capital investment in to improve it.
Mr. Course.
I concur a lot with what Mr. Moon has said. I think if all the flooding issues were solved in Paddock Wood, we could accommodate houses up to what the core strategy was proposed, that was adopted in 2010, which was 600, and then reduced to 470 because of windfalls.
I think we might have a little problem. I'll
speak up if you like.
No, please try and use the microphone, because otherwise afterwards we can't hear you.
The system's gone bust, so I will speak loudly.
Actually, your microphone.
Okay,
just as a quick guide, if you've got a red light,
if
you've got a red light, you're live.
Right. Well, what was I saying? If we talked about the core strategy and the 600 houses, which has now been reduced to 470 at the last, and we're still getting windfalls. We had 7 actually were cleared, approved last night by the Borough Council, 2 previously, so that's another 9. I don't believe we need anywhere near as many houses as were proposed. And if we solve the flooding issues, yes, we could do the core strategy, but not an extra, whatever it is, to get to 950 or 971 or whatever the latest figure that the council comes up with.
Okay, well, we will come on to that later, but I did just want to kind of gauge where you stood. Mrs. Morris.
I agree with both Mr. Moon and Mr. Course. It would require, firstly, I think the entire system to be investigated, enlarged or possibly even a third pumping station, and that I think would merely accommodate, as Mr. Course says, the core strategy figures. If that was all done, that would be great, apart from all the other infrastructure issues we have.
Again, I'm going to agree with the other speakers. One thing I would say is that the Town Council did contact the Borough Council and KCC and all the other agencies almost 2 years ago now, asking that the foul and surface water drainage system of Paddock Wood should be surveyed so that we knew what base we were starting from. That's never happened. And I think that in answer to your actual question, if that were done, and if the results of that were incorporated into an infrastructure improvement in that area that would stop flooding on the new developments and also prevent, reduce the flood risk for the rest of the town, then that would make the allocation acceptable. Again, I don't agree with the over-allocation. I think it should go back to the original target, but that's another subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So as I indicated before, I'm now going to come to development industry interests, and my proposal here is to go to Persimmon, Berkeley, Tesco no wish to speak on this until we get to the town centre site, specifically. Correct. Yep. And Ryden. Okay. I'll come to Ryden after the other two. Persimmon.
Just picking up on some of the specific points that were raised earlier, there was reference to the fact that the Mascalls Court Road site, this was referenced by the Town Council, is dependent on Church Farm to assist with its drainage. That's not the case, so it's been designed so that it can function without that. Obviously, it does have the benefit of assisting the Church Farm site in that it notably reduces the runoff across Maskell's Court road site. So to that extent there is some connection between them, but the Maskell's Court road site is not dependent upon Church Farm coming forward in order to have an appropriate drainage solution. Mrs. Morris referred to lots of existing residents suffering from flooding at the present time, and we wouldn't dispute that at all. I think we see the allocations as one of the most viable ways of ensuring that impact will be reduced moving forward through the flood alleviation schemes that are being proposed. In particular, sir, with regards to the Maskell's Court road site, as I've referred to in our written submissions, the Environment Agency have actually confirmed their support of it. And if I could just quote briefly, sorry for clarification, this is a response to the application that's in on Maskell's Court road site. So we're in a slightly unusual situation as far as allocations, DPD, and that we're
your application
quite
running in advance of the decision on the allocation.
I think that's very relevant with regards to this issue because as a result it has been looked at in a lot more detail than would normally be the case at an allocations DPD consideration. So we submitted very detailed drainage proposals and we've had detailed responses back from the Environment Agency. If I can quote from that, we welcome this development proposal, which includes measures to reduce flood risk to the existing developed areas immediately south of the railway line. In particular, the proposed discharge rate of 2 litres per hectare for scenarios up to the 100-year plus 30% rainfall event. During this critical rainfall event, flows into the East Roden stream from the development site will reduce the flow by 90% compared with the existing greenfield runoff rates. So I think that hopefully helps explain, and in response there was a comment that all the proposal does is to mitigate the impact of the new development. I think reference to that significant reduction in runoff rate will hopefully emphasise the point that no, it doesn't just mitigate for what's coming forward, it actually will enhance the existing situation, and I'll obviously hand over to the Environment Agency colleagues if they wish to comment further.
Well, I will flag, I would like the Environment Agency to address that point. Not now, I'll come through to the rest of the developer interests, but just making a note that does need to be picked up.
With regards to, Mr. Moon commented on the fact that the systems and wastewater system included hasn't been improved since the 1960s. Again, we're not disputing that. We see the allocations as the potentially most viable opportunity to enhance the existing systems. We recognise that Southern Water have notified that there isn't additional capacity at present. They haven't objected to the proposals, however, because they also recognise that it's through the allocations and associated investment that will allow the necessary upgrades to be made to the network, including work to the pumping station as well. Again, because of the advanced stage of the application, discussions have been had with Southern Water with regards to how that can be achieved, and we fully expect those requirements to be conditioned if planning permission is granted. So, just for clarification, we would fully expect works to need to be done, and we'll obviously be awaiting Southern Water's clarification of what that is, but that would come forward and be required by the development. So we're not ignoring that issue, we accept it is an issue, and I think the allocation is the best way to resolve it.
Okay.
I think that's probably all the specifics.
Right.
Thank you.
Now, I had indicated that I'd go Persimmon, Berkeley, Ryden, because Ryden were a little slow on the draw with the Toblerone. But given the relationship between the site that we've just spoken of and the Ryden site, which is downstream of it, would Ryden object to coming next, and then I might come to Berkeley? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. I'd just like to explain the process that both the Council and Ryden Homes have been through in connection with this allocation, but Before I do that, I want to recognise what the participants opposite have said. We're not denying there's an issue here and that there are serious concerns and serious concerns about the impact of development on the flooding situation and perhaps some scepticism. So it is an issue. But I think the key point is that through development proposals, it's our objective, and indeed the Council's objective, not only to ensure the position is not made worse, but to actually improve it. And that's a fundamentally important point. It may be that it's necessary to build trust, to demonstrate that, as well as to put forward the technical means of achieving it. But there is no doubt that is an achievable objective, and it's one that's been pursued by the Council for some time, and indeed by ourselves through the planning application, which was submitted well over a year ago now. I think that what I'd like to do is just run through the policy position and the process that the Council has been through in summary. Through the process of the site allocations local plan, and in fact before the current plan draft, there was a level 2 strategic flood risk assessment in 2009, which showed that the vast majority of the site is in flood zone 1, and that was consistent with Environment Agency mapping. Now, some 12% of the site is within flood zone 3B, but the policy clearly prevents development in that area of the site, and we don't propose development in that area. Now, as you know, so the strategic flood risk assessment is the principal basis for judgments about flood risk in the site allocations local plan, and of course the application of the sequential test. Also, the site is in flood zone 1 and it's not in a critical drainage area, which of course is also important in terms of government guidance on the sequential test. It's entirely appropriate for it to be allocated in terms of the sequential test as defined in the MPPF in the light of that technical evidence base. So I think it was raised, you made reference, sir, I think, to the sequential test in your questions for this session. So I wanted to make clear that there's no requirement to look at alternative sites from a flood risk perspective. Because the sequential test has been applied in getting to this stage of the plan. But if you were to do so, for whatever reason, clearly the Council has looked at the possibility of other sites being available. And it's concluded that the town is constrained. It's constrained by green belt on the western boundary. There's functional floodplain to the north of the town. And there are limited opportunities on previously developed land within the urban area.
And indeed, those are matters that I fully expect the Council to put to us. It's in their written statement, so we'll hear from them in terms of the detail of that.
And that, of course, the urban area is a critical drainage area, so that's an additional constraint on development within the urban area. Now, the Council has also effectively applied the sequential test correctly in looking at the site itself, within the site, in fact, in terms of where development can be located and where it can't on the site. So it's done that by specifying an open space buffer in the northern part and no development in the northern section where there is flood risk. And it's indicated that development should be concentrated on the west and central portions of the site, and also specifically no development in flood zone 3B. Now, Ryden Homes has submitted an application, as you know, and has sought to apply and refine those policy principles in its planning application through the master planning process and through its own flood risk assessment. And Ryden Homes has carried out extensive flood modelling and dialogue with the Environment Agency. Now, I can come to that later because the Environment Agency are represented here. But throughout that process, which has been going on for some time, the Environment Agency has been clear that it's raised no objection to the principle of the development. It's more a question of precisely how flood alleviation is to be achieved and how betterment is to be achieved through the flood modelling process, but we can return to that issue. In terms of betterment, Ryden Homes has vigorously and rigorously pursued the objective of reducing flood risk within the town. And as I said, I understand that there are concerns about that and about whether or not that's been demonstrated, but it has been a very rigorous, extensive and protracted process to demonstrate how that's going to be achieved. Now, I just wanted to stress in talking about betterment that there's a clear policy basis for that objective, which goes back to the core strategy, which does refer to the objective of reducing flood risk within Paddock Wood. Is made clear in the council site allocation templates. It's clearer as a possibility, a potential identified through the strategic flood risk assessment. It's clear in the sustainability appraisal and in the Paddock Wood surface water management plan. So there are numerous references over some period of time to the possibility of development improving the situation. It's well documented, it has a technical foundation. And that, of course, really demonstrate that there are wider sustainable benefits to the community in terms of the development proposals. Now, all of that is achieved through the provision of flood storage basins on the site, which will increase the capacity of the functional floodplain, and only 30% of the capacity of those basins, approximately, is required for surface water from the site itself, and the remainder is available to store excess river flows. Now, Mr. Meader has already explained about the issue of the relationship between the Church Farm site and the Mascalls Court Farm site, because runoff from the Mascalls Court Farm site will actually be reduced. So the two sites in combination will actually improve the situation. Now, some specific points were made about culverts and about flood issues, and I thought it would be helpful if my colleague, Mr. Paul Dakin from Meerbrook, was to come to the table and to answer those questions now, if you welcome that.
I would welcome that, and I'm grateful for your contribution, given that the simple fact of the location of that particular site, the Church Farm site, means that it is the one that, whilst it doesn't control the culverts under the railway line, as I understand it, directly abuts them and would input into the waterways that utilise them. So their capacity, in principle, is of direct relevance to your site. So if that's going to be picked up, that would be useful as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With respect to the culverts, can I actually be heard?
You can be heard, actually. Right. Just introduce yourself again by name.
Sorry.
So that the
I'm Paul Dakin. I work for a company called Meerbrook, and I'm obviously speaking on behalf of Ryden Homes. As a company, we've been involved in looking at various elements related to drainage and flooding, along with other companies that tie in with us to try and assess and refine the proposals for the site. With respect to the culverts, there's always been several issues raised with those, principally being capacity and with maintenance. And with respect to capacity, the developer will never own those particular culverts. They are going to remain with their current owner, which is related to the railways. And as a result of that, we have sought to ensure that the site doesn't impose any additional strain upon those culverts. As a result of the attenuation basins that will be provided, the actual runoff from the site will be pegged at roughly greenfield runoff as it stands in a one-year event at present. So during the more severe storms, the culverts will actually be receiving less water than they currently are. But more than that, because the culverts themselves will become a much more visible element, there'll be greater observation upon them. So the maintenance of them if they become blocked or debris is starting to filter through to them, that will be observed at a much earlier stage, and residents will obviously notify whoever is required to maintain those, rail track, and hopefully a more effective maintenance system will be in place to ensure that any blockage that results in flooding at present doesn't occur.
There are some hopefulies there, and there are also some uncertainties. I mean, I guess there's a distinction between technical measures that are absolutely in the gift of the landowner of the Church Farm site, which would relate to, for example, ensuring that barriers to stop blockage of the culvert entrances by, floating timber and the like can be put in place upstream, and problems that might be serious now could be reduced. But then there is, as has been flagged, the issue of the actual maintenance of the culverts. And that really starts with the question of whose they are. Now, Network Rail, as I would take it, controls the first culvert. Mm-hmm. But then the second culvert, which passes under two rail alignments, it passes under the disused hop pickers line, which is also a separate proposal in the plan for the creation of a green infrastructure corridor. But then there's a further passage under the used rail alignment. It was maybe that second culvert that gave me more pause for concern than anything else, because it's a Victorian structure, apparently. It's a brick structure. And it still isn't clear to me who owns it at all. Some investigations were put in hand after the site inspection. But it would seem that there's a need to reach a confidence level, not necessarily that there is a particular known solution, because that's a matter for a planning application, but that for policy purposes, we're clear that broad risk has been identified and that there are reasonably feasible mechanisms to ensure that if that culvert ceases to perform for some reason, i.e. the structural failure, that it can be restored to at least its current capacity without causing fairly significant problems that would be quite adverse for your site and for the town as a whole.
Well, I think in principle, I can't comment on what was discussed yesterday and any ongoing investigation, but in principle, the ownership of culverts will stay broadly as they are, yeah. So the main culverts effectively will be rail track, and as is the current case, they have a responsibility to maintain that. The issue with the Church Farm site is that, irrespective of who owns those particular culverts, we will not be changing the severity of the hydrology going through those culverts. We're actually reducing the load upon them and making them less sensitive. But yes, there needs to be a maintenance regime that's fully understood and maintainable, but that doesn't change with the development of the Church Farm itself. That regime currently exists.
Well, it does in relation to the Network Rail assets. The one asset that, as I say, is still touching on my mind is the brick culvert underneath the no longer operational rail line, precisely because it's a historic asset, and the future well-being of residents could rest on a situation where we're trying to find out, or somebody's trying to find out, who is responsible for its maintenance, because I would be fairly clear that it maybe wouldn't be Network Rail. If you don't have the immediate answer to that, then we'll move on from that, but we'll need to raise that.
Yep. Oh, well, I'll take a note, but I certainly don't have the immediate answer to that. But I'm sure that's something that we can clarify later.
So getting back up to the top level of your position is that you are broadly satisfied that you can you can contain the demand on those pieces of infrastructure per se, such that they shouldn't need any maintenance that is any different to the maintenance that they should currently have, and they shouldn't be performing any harder tasks than the tasks they currently perform.
No, we shouldn't be placing any extra strain upon those in terms of the discharge rate.
And as a consequence, the result would be, in your view, a net improvement, not a...
Yes, because we'll be providing additional storage elsewhere to intercept any flows that would ordinarily try and force its way through there or across into Paddock Wood itself.
Okay. Now, are there any further observations that you wish to make to...
No, I don't think so. I think we've been through the principle of what we're proposing. So as long as everyone appreciates that the bulk of the storage that's being provided within the Church Farm development is not for the site itself, is actually for a benefit for the wider community.
Okay. Can I then move on to Berkeley? That's it.
Thank you, sir. The flooding problems in Paddock Wood are very well documented. We're very well aware of them, and have been at the forefront of Berkeley's minds with regard to the Mascalls Farm site from day one. So the Jackson-Hyder report, produced jointly, I think, with Kent County Council, the Allocations study produced in April 2015, recognised or explored a number of options looking at the flood risk problems in Paddock Wood. So including, and what that report demonstrated was that there wasn't a one-size-fits-all. There are multiple flood alleviation measures that can be deployed to help alleviate flood risk in the Paddock Wood area. So the Mascalls Farm site was one of those options, option 6 in the northeast corner. Mrs. Stewart referred to the northeast corner of our site earlier in terms of a flooding issue, and that also that there were measures that were already being discussed with the Environment Agency in terms of to improve that. And indeed, the Jackson-Hyder report recognises that as part of the solution, not just mitigation for the site itself, but for more importantly for the wider town in general. So that simple measure in itself will provide improvements to the site and to the wider town. And with development, that mitigation and betterment is increased even further. The important thing to note about the site, sir, is that it is flood zone 1. And that is an important point, sir, in the context of the sites being considered in Paddock Wood. The measures that are being considered for the site, and so we walked through on Monday afternoon the buffer area. We saw where there was going to be a series of linked swales, and as part of the sustainable urban drainage system, to provide on-site storage for runoff as part of the drainage solution for the site. And so, along with the proposed development, there would also be a package of off-site improvements towards other off-site infrastructure via Section 106 contributions. And that's all I'd really have to say at the moment, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, looking at the agencies, best order of play, I suspect, is going to be Environment Agency, Southern Water, no, how best to cut this? Environment Agency, Upper Medway, Southern Water. Does that make sense? Or would no? And then I'll come to Kent County Council. You're just going to be transport. Okay, fine. Environment Agency then. You've been prayed in aid quite a lot. Tell the story as you see it.
Okay, good morning everybody. Where to start? There's quite a lot of issues have been raised. Firstly, if I could touch upon the Jackson Hyder report, which KCC Flood and Drainage Team commissioned a couple of years ago. And they did investigate a number of options which could be done to reduce flood risk throughout Paddock Wood. And as part of that report, they did do some modelling which looked at the impact of the railway on Paddock Wood and the culverts. And what they did actually find was that the capacity of the culverts, while it does have a role to play in reducing the flood risk to the southern part of Paddock Wood, there is the problem that if you do increase them significantly, you could let water in from the Medway system and all the watercourses which are to the north of Paddock Wood. So just by increasing the capacity of the culverts may not necessarily be the answer to all the problems which some people may think. And also, it also investigated that there was lots of areas of flooding and measures which could be done, which were remote from those culverts as well. So just looking at the culverts beneath the railway is not the only thing which needs to be considered.
Briefly interject there, because I guess the observation that I made when I carried out the site inspection was that maybe capacity concerned me less in respect of the evidence that's been put in and indeed the observation that you have just made. The issue that was, as I've already highlighted when I spoke to Ryden, was still left not fully clear in my mind, was the issue of maintenance of existing structure and actually the implications of a lack of maintenance and the implications of failure.
Yeah, sure. Maintenance is a very important issue. They do need to be maintained. They do need to be kept clear. I mean, you quite rightly mentioned the culvert beneath the disused railway on the Church Farm site. That is an important factor. The culverts beneath the Tudley Brook to the western end of Paddock Wood as well as a major contribution to play, as does the one by the Waitrose car park, which has a trash screen on it and is at risk of becoming blocked as well, especially when you have these high-intensity rainfall events. It does need to be kept clear. So yes, they all need to be maintained by the appropriate body and they all need to be kept clear. If I could then sort of make comment on each individual site which the three developers have considered. If I start with the one by Persimmon Homes, yes, it's true that they did submit some details to us probably a couple of years ago now. It was an outline drainage strategy, and they did mention that they would try and limit their runoff from their site to 2 litres per second per hectare for the 100-year critical rainfall event, and included climate change, which would be higher rainfall. Now, as a general rule for this area, greenfield runoff rate under the 2-year rainfall event would be roughly 5 to 8 litres per second per hectare. So by going to 2 litres per second per hectare for a 2-year, they are already sort of reducing the runoff from their site. But
just give me that particular figure again. I'll go back to the evidence and review it.
Okay. Typically, for this area, greenfield runoff rate would be approximately between 5 and 8 litres per second per hectare.
Thank you very much.
And that would be for the critical 2-year rainfall event, 2-year return period. So by limiting runoff to 2 litres per second per hectare, they're already sort of reducing runoff. And by limiting that for all events up to the critical 100-year event, there would be quite a significant reduction in runoff from their site into the watercourses which downstream. So, yes, I do agree that they are reducing runoff, or they propose to reduce runoff from their site. What I would say, though, that is the Persimmon site is only a small part of the catchment.
This was going to be my next question, so you anticipate.
So, yes, they are reducing the runoff from their site, but there's quite a lot of runoff would enter those watercourses from the catchment as a whole. So, while they are going to be reducing the situation, it's not going to solve the problem. And similarly, it will be reducing the flow slightly into the Church Farm site, so it's not increasing the problem for the Church Farm developer or for the residents adjacent to Church Farm. What we haven't seen yet is detail of the proposed means of surface water drainage, and as a result of changes to national consultation procedures between the Environment Agency, local planning authorities and the lead local flood authority, which in this case is Kent County Council, when a planning application is made, the Environment Agency will not be consulted on that site because it is in Flood Zone 1. But the Kent County Council Flood and Drainage team will be consulted, and so they will consider the surface water drainage proposals of that site.
Now, this is maybe more a question of procedure than policy, but I would like to pick that point that you've just raised up and park it on the council's desk in terms of how best to trigger the most appropriate consultation with the most appropriate bodies, because I note the point that you raise, but there are sometimes circumstances where the normal and expected consultation procedure maybe isn't the right procedure for the site, because the needs of the site serve the needs of a broader area or settlement, and this appears to be an instance where that might be the case, where you might potentially need to be consulted. Would the Environment Agency object in principle to being consulted in those circumstances, or?
No, we wouldn't. As for all the sites at Paddock Wood, we've continued to work with Tunbridge Wells Borough Council and the Kent County Council Flood and Drainage team. There's quite a good working relationship between all three partners on this. So it's quite likely, although we may not be formally consulted, it's quite possible that the officers from Kent County Council would liaise with us over this matter. And we'd be quite happy to make contributions, technical contributions. Okay, if we come on to the Church Farm site, the Ryden Home site, I would concur again that most of the site is in Flood Zone 1. There's a northern section which is in Flood Zone 3. I think you stated 12%. I don't know if that's exactly right. I'm sure it is. Seems about right. And Ryden said they do not propose development in that part of the site. I think from memory of the planning application, there's no residential development proposed in that site, but some of the flood mitigation measures are included in that part of the site. They have undertaken detailed modelling to try and come up with solutions to reduce flood risk beyond just reducing or managing the surface runoff from the proposed development. They have been working with us and Kent County Council Flood Drainage Team and the Upper Medway Internal Drainage Board on this matter. We haven't agreed the details yet. They're still working on it. And we would push as hard as we can to make sure that there is a reduction to flood risk to the relevant part of the town, which is the Dimmock Close area, the part adjacent to Church Farm. And so we'll continue to work with the developer in that vein.
Okay. And then there's the Berkeley site.
Yep, the Berkeley site, as stated, is completely in Flood Zone 1. And similar to the Persimmon site, there wouldn't be a statutory requirement to consult the Environment Agency. But similarly, I have seen sight of the initial proposals, because I attended a meeting with them that was at the KCC offices. And this is an example that KCC asked me to attend as well and to provide input to that. And from memory of that site, proposals were put in quite robust sustainable drainage proposals to actually manage the runoff from their site. But KCC Flood and Drainage Team would be the lead authority on considering that. And with all sites, what I would stress is that you can have a very detailed surface water drainage network, but the critical thing is future maintenance of that as well. They do need to be maintained.
Well, I'm going to ask you what's probably an obvious question, but it's one that I will put to the other agencies as well, and it is whether, given the purposes of this exercise that we're currently engaged in, which is to review the soundness of proposed allocations as distinct from applications for planning permission, whether there are, in the Environment Agency's view, impediments to allocation per se, and then secondly, whether there are any detailed revisions to policy that you're pursuing. Because, we're in a forum now with the local community present. Documentation has been exchanged, but it'd be useful to just orally summarise your position.
Okay. We have no objection in principle to any of the three of those major residential proposals. The Berkeley site and the Persimmon site are both in flood zone 1. All we would recommend will be in line with national guidance, which is the non-statutory technical guidance on sustainable drainage, that they conform to that. We would encourage going beyond that, which they've certainly indicated they're prepared to do. With the Church Farm site, similarly, most of it is in flood zone 1, so we would have no objection in principle to that being allocated. There is a small part in flood zone 3, and we're working with the developer of that to make sure that that area is dealt with appropriately, following the sequential approach, so that there's no vulnerable forms of the development put in there, and they are also to provide flood risk benefit for the local area in terms of flood risk. So there's no objection in principle to any of those three sites.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now then, Upper Medway.
Thank you. Just to explain, the Internal Drainage Board's main interest is in surface water drainage to open water courses and local flood risk. The board therefore maintains a number of water courses, and one of the priorities of the board is to make sure that access is retained so that they can continue to maintain them in future. The most relevant water courses to these three developments are the East and West Road and Streams and the Gravelly Ways Stream. They're all IDB adopted water courses and therefore IDB maintained. I think the board accepts that upstream development can reduce downstream flood risk, as has been explained by the developers and the Environment Agency, so I won't go over that again. The board is mainly concerned, I think, though, in relation to flood storage, again, as the Environment Agency has stated, at the northern end of the Church Farm development, and getting that right there. So the IDB is working with the Environment Agency and KCC's flood risk management team in respect of that, and we're waiting to hear back from the developer from that. I think I'd say the issue with the culverts, it is a landowner responsibility or an asset owner responsibility. So you're right in saying that it's Network Rail for the ones under the live railway, and it will be whoever owns the land or the adjacent land of the upstream culvert.
It's the whoever dimension that's
yeah.
Still giving me pause for thought. Okay.
But if the site boundary borders that, then that will include the developer.
It does sufficient to enable the developer to develop details as part of a flood mitigation scheme that would include measures to stop, obvious risks like blockage of culvert through floating material. But as we've said, that there's still this residual concern about who owns that particular piece of infrastructure and whether it is under any form of active maintenance at all, and what might happen if it's not.
I should say the IDB does, under permissive powers, under the Land Drainage Act, it regularly maintains those watercourses, and it does carry out debris clearance fairly regularly. But it obviously can't guarantee to keep those structures clear at all times. The formal responsibility is with the landowner.
So again, I'm going to put the same question that I put to the Environment Agency back to you. Considering the nature of the task that we're now focused on, which is the in principle acceptability of allocation as opposed to the detail of a planning application.
No objection from the board in principle, subject to the detail of the drainage proposals. The outline discharge rates and storage rates stated are acceptable. The main query is in relation to flood storage at the northern part of the Church Farm site.
And again, just to be clear, that's a technical concern about the how.
Yes, yeah.
And so one that you would envision dealing with at outline planning application or master plan stage.
I suppose so, yeah.
Okay. Right. Anything else you need to add? Okay, well, if you can drop the Toblerone and I'll come to Southern Water.
Thank you. I thought it might be helpful if we talk a little bit about the sites that are allocated first of all, and then about the move on to the existing situation after that.
Yes, it would, because clearly, the local community interest is in a composite of the two, and there's the issue of assurance about the contribution of the allocated sites, and then there's the much deeper, I suspect, issue about the condition of the town as it currently stands.
Okay.
Okay.
So starting then with the sites that are allocated in the site allocations document, Southern Water has assessed the impact of those sites on our foul sewage system. In terms of those sites, Southern Water is an infrastructure provider, and our responsibility is to provide foul water drainage to service those sites. In terms of surface water, we would expect the developments to apply the drainage hierarchy set out in the planning practice guidance and in H3 of the building regulations. And that means that we wouldn't expect the surface water to connect to our system. We would expect the development to consider alternative means of surface water drainage in line with that hierarchy. In terms of the foul water drainage then, we have modelled the potential impact of that foul water on our foul water sewerage system, and that assessment has revealed that existing capacity is insufficient to service the anticipated demand arising from those sites, as I think one of the developers acknowledged earlier. And in that context, we have made representations to the site allocations document to recognise that, and we have requested policy provision to secure delivery of that infrastructure in phase with the development. So I think that's our role in terms of the allocated sites. In terms of the existing issues, drainage issues in Paddock Wood, Southern Water is a flood risk management authority, and we have worked in collaboration with the lead local flood authority there. So that would be Kent County Council, and my colleague Mike Tomlinson has been involved in the preparation of the surface water management plan for Paddock Wood. So I'll hand over to him to explain our involvement there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, as my colleague just mentioned, we've been actively involved in the production of the surface water management plan, which I referred to earlier, that was produced by Jackson Hyder. And I think one of the significant conclusions that has come out of that is that the flooding mechanism within Paddock Wood is quite complex. And one of the things that we've found from the work that's been carried out and the modelling that's been carried out by KTC as part of that is that we are experiencing, and this is evident on site, situations where some of our surface water systems cannot adequately discharge into the land drainage system, so they become surcharged and can't adequately discharge. This can, in certain circumstances, rainfall events, compromise the system, and surface water then can enter the foul system via inundation. So you can see that, we aren't actually a land drainage authority, but it would appear that under certain circumstances our system is acting as a conduit for that. To talk about some of the existing issues that we have within Paddock Wood, it was mentioned earlier that failure of a pumping station, the Station Road pumping station. We are aware of that, and we have put measures in place to bring that station back up into full operational condition. We had a control failure on the day of the recent flooding that occurred. We were also, from the recent flooding events, KCC kindly sent us some reports of flooding, which Mrs. Morris kindly sent through, and we have investigated those and will be taking appropriate action regarding any surface water drainage that we're responsible for. So we are constantly trying to improve our situation from a maintenance perspective to ensure it is working adequately. The report, the evidence that was actually submitted to this, we've only obviously recently received, and it would be useful to actually get the data behind that report so we can have a look at that and use that going forward. Because from looking at the initial report, the reports that we received regarding flooding are less than actually has been reported there. So there is a communication situation which we want to take forward with the Town Council and Tunbridge Wells Borough Council on how we can better address reporting.
Okay, what I'm going to ask you to do then is, during the next break, if you can identify the particular documents in respect of which you want to enter into further communication, alert the programme officer and also have the necessary conversations with the Town Council and the Borough Council, who are both here. Because what I'm inevitably going to ask you, given that remark, is the degree to which you're able to provide firm advice and a concluded position on the documentation that we've seen to date. And the answer feels to me at the moment to be no. So I'm probably going to need to provide a mechanism for you to review the documentation in dialogue with others, and then to provide some sort of subsequent written response that others can then respond to.
Right. Okay. Yes, we are already in communication with Tunbridge Wells Borough Council on the formation of a flood forum, so we can get the relevant stakeholders involved for further discussions on moving some of these issues forward.
My concern will be getting that work, getting you to a point where you can communicate a clear view about satisfaction or otherwise sufficiently early in the piece to enable me to make a recommendation. That would be the piece of work that I would be most interested in, and I'm talking about a matter of no more than a few weeks. And that doesn't mean to say everything's got to be solved. That just means that you've got to be clear that you've reviewed all of the material that's been circulated for this hearing.
Yes.
And you've responded to it, and in the light of it, either your existing submissions remain perfectly adequate, or alternatively, they don't for a reason.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. That makes sense.
Okay.
Sorry.
No. I'm done with that. So.
All right. Okay.
What I will do is I'll come back to that after the break, so we can discuss practical arrangements. But use the break to have some conversations about what you need to see and when you think you can respond to it by.
Okay, that's fine. Yes. I just want to bring one other point up. Surveys were mentioned. Reference was also made about in our capacity check. So we do have a hydraulic model, computer model that we have produced back in I think it was around year 2000, and we used that at the time that the model was produced. As part of that exercise, we would have carried out a flow survey, collected rainfall data, so we then produced what we call a verified model. So we have carried out survey work from perspective of monitoring flow survey. We then use that particular model for capacity checks and for submissions and inquiries we receive. I said it was produced in 2000, but it is continuously updated with information we receive about amendments to the sewerage system and additional housing as contributes. Thank you.
Okay. Now, does that bring you to the end of everything that you need to say? Yes? Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is almost exactly 11 o'clock. I'm very conscious that I have a forest of semaphore signals on this side of the room. In fairness, though, what I'm going to do is two things. I'm going to come to the council, whose plan it is at the end of the day, immediately after we have broken for 15 minutes to allow ourselves to take stock. When they have spoken, as I said before, because these matters are complex, I will come round one more time so that matters that are consequential, that have emerged during the first round of discussion, can be picked up. So if everybody for Paddock Wood is content with that, let's break now. Let's return at 1:15 when we will continue this discussion with the council. Mr. Hinton, are you?
Sorry, sir. Can I just respond to one matter that came up at the end there about, I think it was, I didn't quite catch how it was referenced, but I think the reference was made to a recent report. Can I just clarify the council's understanding and position on that? Because I wasn't going to cover that in my main comments, just for clarity.
Fine.
A situation arose in Paddock Wood some weeks ago, and an instance of flooding, which the town council and various residents alerted the council to, and anticipating that might be referred to at this hearing, I emailed the various agencies about that and asked them to give consideration as to the significance of that event and why it might have been caused, which they have done. And emails and information about that have been communicated between the Borough Council and the agencies. What has happened is that Mrs. Morris has now referenced that in one of her documents, but the agencies obviously haven't had the opportunity to see that document until recently.
Because of the deadline, which was very close. The deadline.
So in my mind, I'm quite clear that it's a fairly simple matter of the agencies just producing a letter or a paper for you which summarises and comments on the dialogue that they've already been having with the Borough Council. So it's a simple matter.
Well, as I indicated before, I think the best thing to do is to have your private conversation during the break, then just flag with the programme officer the identity of the particular document or documents that are at issue, so that that's then recorded, and then we can come back to this after the break and make an arrangement, and it may well be the one that you propose is a very simple way forward. However, let's break now. That has consumed another 5 minutes, so I will extend the break to 20 past. I think we need at least 15 minutes to gather our thoughts. Back at 20 past, ladies and gentlemen. I believe we should be able to make a start. Now, before we return to the agenda, there was the issue of Southern Water clarifying with the Council and other stakeholders around the status of very recently exchanged documents and the possible need to reserve their position and write a letter. The disturbance in the break may not have helped you resolve that issue. Do you need extra time to have conversations with the Council and other stakeholders?
We've had a conversation with the Council, and I think one of the proposals is to meet with the Town Council and the Flood Warden to discuss the issue, and we resolved to write to the Programme Officer regarding recent correspondence that we've had with the Council.
Okay. What I want to get to is a timescale for that, so that I can then programme that in with the remaining time in this examination. Mr. Hinton, any observations on it or views about timing?
So the discussion with Southern Water, I think the way forward would be, as I say, because there had already been email correspondence with the various agencies about the event that's been referred to in the statement submitted to you. I believe the way forward would be to give the opportunity to Kent County Council, Southern Water and the Environment Agency to submit a further letter to you via the Programme Officer, each of them commenting on the event which occurred in September and the implications or not of that for the evidence that they've already put into you, sir. As far as the timescale is concerned, I think, given, for instance, that the KCC drainage team isn't represented today, I think it's going to be in the region of sort of 10 days in terms of getting a letter from each of those agencies into the Programme Officer.
Well, the wonderful date of the 24th of December has already been established as one date on which a number of representors are placing additional comment in. To keep the Programme Officer and my understanding of the flow of documentation simple, I'd like to suggest that date again, if that's okay with
that'd
the
be
council.
fine.
Is that okay with the agencies that have been referred to?
Could I just ask that the Town Council be involved in that as well, as the authority on the ground, as it were? Is that
Well, the proposal
feasible?
from Southern Water was that you would be, and Mr. Hinton didn't mention you, but let's get that clarified.
That's why I clarified it.
Any objection to the Town Council also being involved in that process?
Southern Water have no objection.
Okay. Now, can I just clarify with the Town Council, there's a suggestion of direct engagement with Southern Water. What about the other agencies? Are you suggesting you need to meet with them before you would write?
I'm not sure. We don't need to meet with them per se, but we probably do need to be looped in on the discussion about the event that was a couple of weeks ago, if that makes sense.
It does make complete sense. Would it be sufficient that the Town Council become a CC to any preliminary email conversation in terms of settling anyone's positions on this, so that then they can write a letter to me on or around the 24th that's as informed as it can be without necessarily having to trigger another round of meetings? Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll add the Town Council. Okay, well, I have that recorded and we'll put that mechanism into train. Everybody understand what they think they need to do. Okay, so to take us back to where we were just before the break, I was indicating that I'd go to the council, the borough council next, and that I would then provide a brief second round for those people representing the community at Paddock Wood. So, Mr. Hinton, who's leading on this? Is it yourself? The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. If I may, I'd like to start on a particular point that emerged from the discussion, and this was the point about consultation arrangements between the Borough Council as local planning authority and the EA and Kent County Council. So you'll be aware that as a result of legislative changes in recent times, the respective roles of lead flood authority and the implications for that of the role of the EA have changed, and this is a national situation, and I think it's a situation where the new lead flood authorities have had to have the opportunity of sort of bedding in new arrangements, as have the Environment Agency, in terms of what their role will be going forward. However, whatever the statutory defined roles may be, obviously in a case such as this involving 3 sites which all have to some degree issues of flooding to be considered, and the context of Paddock Wood that you've heard about and read about, I think the practicality of the situation is that you could be rest assured that there would be a three-way conversation between the council and Kent County Council and the agency to ensure that in considering any planning application we have all the advice that we need in order to make an appropriate decision. So hopefully I can give you comfort that we would engage with both County Council and the EA, and in fact any other agency involved in the flooding issues, to ensure that we had their full input into the planning application process.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is one of these examples where common sense and statutory consultation don't necessarily dovetail quite as well as we might like. Now, the remainder of your response to everything else that's been put.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, you've read a lot of detailed statements on the subject of flooding, and you've heard further information today, having gone round the table. And I don't intend to repeat that because you have a lot of detail there. Just a few points to make. As you've already read and heard, there is an evidence base to support the plan. And there's an evidence base and various studies which actually look in detail at the flooding context and issues at Paddock Wood. In respect to the studies that were commissioned and led by the County Council, you will be aware that those studies involved input from all the relevant agencies and also the Town Council. And the output of that collaborative approach is that all those agencies and those who fed into that process agreed the findings and the information that went into those studies. And indeed, the preparation of those studies would have been able to be informed by knowledge of the residents and the community's concerns about flooding in Paddock Wood. So I think, again, you can be reassured that those studies were robust in having regard to all information, both technical and on the ground, that was available. You will also see from partly those studies and from what you've heard today and read that the existing situation in Paddock Wood regarding flooding and drainage is influenced by a number of factors. And some of those are existing factors which would remain regardless of what development actually happened in Paddock Wood, and you've rightly identified those issues, picking up on the points that have been made by the local community. But you've also heard that through the pre-application and application stages, and we have two planning applications which are at an advanced stage, that those processes have enabled the situation and the issues to be considered in far greater detail than you would normally expect in sitting to examine a site allocations document. So again, I think we are in a positive position of having confidence that these issues are being scrutinised extremely comprehensively, and again, I would say can be scrutinised having regard to the full concerns that have been expressed by the public and the local community. You've also heard and had confirmation this morning from the various agencies that none of them object in principle to the allocations and to the development that is being put forward. You've heard that there is positive ongoing dialogue to reach technical solutions which would address what would normally be expected in terms of the developments on the sites themselves. But in addition to that, you've had confirmation both in principle and to some degree detail that there is a confidence that the proposals will also bring betterment to the town as a whole. So you'll be aware that, as set out in the National Planning Framework, it's quite clear that new development is not intended and not required to solve all pre-existing issues and problems that might exist. But as I've just said, you've had confirmation today that each of the proposals and the allocations can actually provide betterment to the situation on the ground. Finally, in terms of considering the wider issues for Paddock Wood, the Borough Council does believe that there is a need for greater communication and exchange of information on the complex issues of drainage and flooding in Paddock Wood, and we believe that there is a need for greater proactive engagement and collaboration by the various people who have a bearing on these issues, and that would include the agencies, the town council, landowners, the community at large, and also obviously in this context the developers responsible for the development that's being proposed. We have already engaged in a dialogue with the agencies concerned with a view to promoting the establishment of a local flood forum for Paddock Wood, and I think this would be a key forum for taking forward some of the proactive actions that are required and which don't necessarily fall within the gambit of the planning system. And I would see the issue of the ownership and maintenance of the culverts as being one of the very important issues of that. So we have had initial discussions about that. The Borough Council would like to lead in a role to enabling the establishment of such a forum, which we would commend as the appropriate means to take some action in terms of these issues which affect the existing town situation, and as I say, would be there to be addressed regardless of any development that might be promoted through these sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, if I can return to Paddock Wood community representatives, and again, what I'm going to suggest is that I leave Paddock Wood Town Council to the end this time so that they can, as in their overarching role, draw together themes that emerge from others. So I'm going to suggest that I go to Mrs. Morris, Mr. Corse, Mr. Moon, and then Paddock Wood Town Council. So, Mrs. Morris.
It appears to me that a great deal of faith has been based in the term maintenance. I would just cite a case, particularly with Network Rail, that a block culvert was reported to them several months ago and it still hasn't been cleared. So that is an issue. And it also seems that the future safety of Paddock Wood is based on desktop exercises and current weather models. And as we all know from recent incidents in Paddock Wood, those don't always apply. We have a civil engineer who's a resident of Paddock Wood, and he's scrutinised all the documents, and he is not convinced that any of the measures proposed so far will do the job. And I would just like to say that should these developments go ahead and more flooding occurs in Paddock Wood, more extensive flooding occurs in Paddock Wood, that those authorities will be, that Tunbridge Wells Borough Council and perhaps even the developers will be hearing from us again.
Indeed, but essentially one of the outcomes sought by these sorts of processes is to try and resolve whether those adverse impacts can be adequately controlled, or alternatively whether the allocation should not proceed fully as proposed. So that's a dilemma that's sitting in my basket that, as I've observed before in a number of other hearings, you are never going to agree on in this room, I suspect, a way forward. So I will have to take it away and make appropriate recommendations to the Council in the light of everything that I've heard. Mr. Corse. And Mrs. Morris, if you could just move your... Thank you very much.
We've heard quite a bit about the critical site in Paddock Wood is Church Farm. One of the recommendations that we've seen for Church Farm is to put the attenuation ponds near the railway at the northern end, downstream of the development. Now, all the advice that I've seen states that this is the wrong place to put them. The Environment Agency objected to Ridenhome's application in December 2014, stating that the proposed attenuation ponds are located downstream rather than upstream of the area subject to flooding. This is therefore likely to increase flood risk to adjacent areas. The Internal Drainage Board said virtually the same thing. Balancing ponds are to be located in areas already at risk of flooding because they're in the flood zone. This could result in the balancing ponds being inundating during a flood event, which would make them ineffective when most needed. The Environment Agency's published guidance on this, the Fluvial Design Guide, says that they should be upstream rather than downstream. The KCC study also points out that they're in the wrong place. We had a site visit at Church Farm on Monday. The representative from Ryden showed us their plans. They still, even though we've had the objection based on the statutory authorities stating where these balancing ponds should be, still their plans show that the balancing ponds are going to be in the northern edge, downstream of the development. Is it any wonder that we have no faith in what's going to happen to Paddock Wood?
Indeed, and what I'm going to suggest actually, Mr. Cawes, is that we carry this particular discussion into the next part of the agenda, because what we'll need to look at is the precise wording of policies and indeed an issue which is the relationship between the parts of allocations that are proposed for built development and the parts that have been identified for a landscape buffer, where in part these balancing ponds have been proposed to be placed. Now, the Council are proposing some alterations to PW3, including a splitting of the policy so there's more precise detail in policy terms between the Church Farm site and the Maskell's Court site. And one of the questions that I've got for them is about the nature of landscape buffer notation on the allocation and whether there's sufficient precision at this stage to say that's the place where balancing ponds are found. Now, one of the things we've got to be careful about when we're having that conversation is the fact that what I'm not doing is dealing with an outline planning application or a master plan. And there is inevitably... Well, here you're objecting to the site allocation, well, the site visit, with respect, wasn't all about the planning application. What the site visit did was have regard to the master plan as Ryden have developed it in its present form, so that I could see what they were proposing. And bear that in mind in my consideration of the allocation as it currently stands. And that's an opportunity that I've accorded to any developer who's promoting the allocation of a particular site. If they've got master plan work in hand that shows how they would respond to the policies, and that's been put in evidence in front of me, which it has, I've offered them an opportunity to point out the physical components of it on site. But that's all that was. What I want you to do is that when we move into a discussion with the Council about the changes to the policy that they're proposing, that we'll pick up this issue at that time. Okay. Paddock Wood Labour Party.
Thank you, sir. In relation to the comments made by developers, Permison Homes indicated that their development was based on standalone mitigation to drainage. I would question that because a recent planning application for Church Farm and Maskell's Court Lane was based on a hybrid application whereby some of the mitigation at Church Farm and Maskell's Court Lane, Green Lane, was based on what was happening at Church Farm. And the proposed discharge rates based on holding ponds and the drainage mitigation at Church Farm were both linked. So I don't think it's quite true to say it's a standalone issue. As regards Ryden, there is an issue or an argument of betterment, and I accept that. But if it's just holding ponds, I question whether it's necessarily based on need and not actually on, they're looking more at the cost. It's already been indicated to improve the restriction of culverts could be substantial monies. Finally, in relation to the culverts, and the big issue is the ownership and maintenance of those culverts. And previous flooding in the past in Paddock Wood, where there hasn't been adequate maintenance, residents have actually gone out there themselves at times of risk to clear the culverts. So it's still a major issue in Paddock Wood. Berkeley Homes, again, they mention betterment, which again is questionable, because if it's based on holding ponds, and Paddock Wood Town Council have experienced this quite notably over the years, it's just not always a hole in the ground. After a certain number of years, it becomes a nature habitat, and to actually try and rectify the efficiency of those ponds is extremely difficult, because you cannot just go in there and de-silt and make them as equally efficient as when they was first put there. So there is that issue where it needs to be addressed, and I believe KCC were looking at that, at trying to maintain them in future new developments, but I don't think that's progressed. In relation to basic in principle for the other agencies, I accept that. Southern Water, I think, have raised issues whereby they are concerned about the ingress of surface water into their wastewater network. And I think they probably still have concerns that there's not adequate mitigation in the proposals at this stage to rectify that. In relation to Tunbridge Wells Borough Council, I do welcome a local flood forum, and we've been trying to establish that for many years in Paddock Wood in relation to flooding. But I would say this, considering I think we're in a situation of critical situation in regard to flooding, that no new development in Paddock Wood should actually take place until that forum is in place and made recommendations. Because what you can still understand, these are 3 big allocations. In Paddock Wood, we are still having individual planning applications, which all gradually are adding up to the issues of the overall flooding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then finally, the Town Council. And Mr. Moon, if you can just turn your Toblerone down, please.
As regards the flood forum, the chairman of Paddock Wood Town Council, after the flooding that we had in 2013, did in fact invite all the various agencies to meetings about flooding in the town. And as a result of that, that has most of the dialogue that has happened between the developers, specifically Rydens and KCC, the Upper Medway Internal Drainage Board, and the Planning Department, followed on from that, because prior to this they weren't speaking to each other. I welcome the introduction of a flood forum. I would say that we haven't been told there was going to be one as Paddock Wood Town Council. I've checked with my colleague, she wasn't told either. But that's probably a good thing going forward, but it's not the sort of thing that is going to influence the outcome of this inspection, because obviously we'll be talking a few weeks' time to set up that sort of a meeting. The other thing I wanted to query, Mr. Deakin from Merebrook was explaining that they would be using attenuation basins to hold back water in times of heavy rainfall. We've had experience of attenuation ponds in Paddock Wood. They're incredibly expensive to maintain. And the other difficulty is due to the clay geology of the area and the fact that it is flat. What tends to happen is they fill up with water generally at the beginning of the winter, and they're full for the entire period of the winter. Therefore, when it comes to a storm situation, there is no more capacity in them, so they don't actually add to the available water storage facility. If they were talking about building underground tanks with pumps and so forth, that would sort of make more sense, but I would understand that that would be a more expensive option to go for. The other difficulty we've had is in 2013, when we had flooding to the north of the railway line. That was actually caused by the fact that the River Medway was full. The pressure of the water in the River Medway meant that the drainage system to the north of the railway could not go into the Medway and was all backing up basically towards the railway line. And what I can see happening is obviously the culverts under the railway line are effectively a two-way system. And if you had that situation arise again and you had attenuation ponds, those attenuation ponds would not be able to drain through the culverts and to the north of the railway line, and therefore would be completely ineffective in terms of preventing flooding of those sites and also flooding of the neighbouring residential areas. As regards the incident of flooding a few weeks ago in the town centre, I would point out that that area has flooded every single winter for the last 3 years. This isn't a one-off. This is something that regularly happens. And I don't think you can put it down to just maybe one blocked culvert or some other incident, and that should be taken into consideration. And that's it. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, as I indicated before, I'm conscious that there is unlikely to be an outbreak of an agreement around this table. So what I will do is just very briefly and in summary terms ask if there are any of those issues that have just been raised that any of the other agency or developer parties briefly wish to respond to. Now, I see Ryden Homes with a flag up. I see Persimmon. The agencies all remain content as you currently are. Okay, I will come to Ryden first, then Persimmon.
Thank you, sir. I don't know if you want me to address the question of the location of the attenuation basins at this point, or whether you're going to come to that later. We're happy to deal with that now.
What I was going to cover that when I asked the council to speak about their proposed amendments to the policy, because I think that's probably the best way.
Happy to do it in that context.
We can deal with it. And that's when I'd like Mr. Corse's matter to come in as well.
There were some other points made about the efficiency of the basins, and it may be appropriate to respond to that now.
Indeed.
Okay.
With respect to the efficiency, they are. Excuse me. I don't have any great concern that they won't be capable of storing the surface water runoff from the site. It's all about the magnitude of the ponds, and relative to the site, they are, quite enormous because they have a dual function in terms of capturing overland flows as well. So the function of the pond themselves, it's governed by a controlled outflow. So at some point, it will hold water. It will wait until there's a discharge available, and then that water will go away. The whole function of the pond is actually to hold that water back. So it's not just a free drain through. So at some point during the winter events, you're quite right, there will be water standing in there, but there will be capacity beyond then to control the runoff from the site afterwards. It's all about the volume that we are going to design into that pond.
Can you give some assurances that address the concerns of community groups, essentially that these won't become standing impoundments of water that are essentially already full at a point when they might be required to deal with a flood event?
Yes, well, the design will go through the normal good practice guides, and the design will be quantified to provide the storage required for individual storm events. But there's also debate over whether they're going to be providing some amenity anyway. So they may actually be a wet pond providing ecological betterment as well. So these aren't just going to be holes in the ground. They're going to be carefully designed, and they'll have the functions with quite gradual side slopes, because there was a question mentioned about maintenance, so that people will be able to get in, maintain those relatively easily, and ensure that the long-term functioning and the long-term volume contained within those basins remains, so that on subsequent storms, subsequent years, next generations, that volume will remain, so the functionality of the pond will remain.
Okay. And then briefly, if you're able just to touch on the point in respect of back pressure extension from Medway systems to the north of the railway embankment, and circumstances where
Well, again, it's going to be designed on a discharge rate, and that will give us a storage volume. And there will be an element of there that we can design in that says, okay, at this point, they may not be a free discharge, and there'll be a volume allocated in there to hold that water in place. So what I'm saying is that the volume will be sufficient so that you won't have a failure of the drainage system.
Functionality will, in your view, be maintained?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Anything else you need to add?
I don't think so, not at this time.
Okay. Persimmon, then.
Thank you, sir. I'll keep it quite brief.
And Ryden, if you can just pop the Toblerone down. Thank you very much.
Just coming back to Mr. Moon's comment about the Mascot Court road development being dependent upon Church Farm in some way with regards to drainage. I specifically asked our drainage engineers this question just yesterday, and they have absolutely confirmed that no, it's not dependent upon Church Farm. I think there may be some confusion coming around because obviously when the applications have gone in, we're aware that the Church Farm application in it as well. So I'm sure there's been cross-reference to what is happening and the impact of our drainage scheme upon the Church Farm proposal if that takes place as well. So there will have been cross-reference, to the two schemes. I'd imagine that's where the reference has been within the text to what's happening. But as I say, that our drainage experts have confirmed it's not dependent upon Church Farm, but obviously the impact of what happens on our site may affect the exact drainage impact on Church Farm. But if Church Farm doesn't proceed, we can still proceed with a sound drainage strategy.
Okay. I mean, essentially, I'm going to have to take all of this away and review it with great rigour and make recommendations on the basis of matters still being contested between relevant parties. Anything else that the Council wants to add before we move away from flooding?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm just going to briefly review time and our progress, because in terms of other infrastructure issues, before we get on to the structure of policies, the soundness of allocations, can I just see a show of Toblerones from those who want to speak on other infrastructure? Okay. Right. And, yes, Mr. Tofts.
Sir, just in relation to your point about timing, I've checked with our town hall keepers and there is a full council meeting here at 5 o'clock, so they do ask if we could vacate by 4 o'clock.
Right. So, we are betwixt a rock and a hard place. What I'm then going to suggest, which isn't going to go down well amongst all present in the room, but I'm going to abbreviate lunch. I think we will, we're not going to cover all of these matters now in an hour, so I'm going to add half an hour onto the session. We'll break at past, not at 1 o'clock. If it is that there are then still some matters on this agenda outstanding, I will review the agenda for next week, because there is a possibility of fitting some additional time, if needs be, into Wednesday of next week. However, don't plan for that, because what I'm planning for still is that we deal with everything that we need to have dealt with, hopefully by 1:30. Okay, so I've seen where everybody wishes to go in terms of other infrastructure. Once we've dealt with other infrastructure, we can then move to the other questions on the agenda, which broadly relate to the soundness of allocations as a whole, but most of the factors, as I see it, that bear on those questions are the questions that we've already debated, as the flooding and infrastructure questions seem to be a substantial component of that conversation, and we can then deal with responses to proposed changes to policy wordings. Okay, with no more ado then, on the remaining infrastructure points, Do Paddock Wood Town Council not want to speak on this? Okay, I'm going to go to Mrs. Morris. I'm going to go to Mr. Moon and Paddock Wood Town Council. I'm then going to bring in CPRE. Then I'll come across to this side of the room. And then finally to the council. So, Mrs. Morris.
I'd like to speak about traffic, which I have concerns over, resulting from volunteers carried out a traffic survey over many weeks on the roads around the Church Farm and Maskell's Court Road application sites. Our figures differed, so I'm very concerned that the plans being put in place on figures which don't tally with ours, and we did do it. It was extensive over many hours and over many weeks. And also local knowledge differs in terms of the routes that would be taken by traffic to these sites. Warrington Road in particular is not fit for purpose. It was a cul-de-sac 50 years ago. It's got a loose rubble base, concrete and tarmac on top of that. There are many dips in the road and it's already collapsed under a large vehicle. And I fear that and it will become a main route to the Church Farm site. There's no doubt about that. Those of us who drive around Paddock Wood daily know it's the most direct route. And I have a feeling that the road itself will collapse in time. But as I say, I'm concerned over the figures, that all of this is being based on figures which I think are misleading and differ, they're less than ours, and also the estimates of traffic from these sites.
Thank you, sir. Looking at the DPD, one of the key elements of the free allocations, the free developments, is having a master plan. Now, as far as I recall, I don't think I've actually seen the master plan that takes into account all free developments, including the flooding, including the impact on our medical facilities within the town. Because Paddock Wood was not a town some years ago, it was a small village, a parish. That doesn't appear to have been addressed. There will be schooling impacts on Maskell's and our primary school, which affect all three developments. Traffic management is a big issue, particularly at Church Farm and at Green Lane and the Badsall Road, which is one of the main inputs into Paddock Wood, hence the traffic lights, and the impact on that and traffic movements that would affect the town. One of the proposals of Church Farm is cycleways, etc., footpaths into the railway station. I'm not totally convinced that all residents will actually use those facilities in a new development. The impact that would have on Network Rail's parking, which then would impact on Paddock Wood's parking. At the moment, we are having more increase in residents' parking, and I can see that being a problem in the future as more people use the railway station and the parking requirement. So, in short, where's the master plan, and why hasn't that been put in place before the responses to the allocation in March 2013 and the present one in this year and resulting in this hearing? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to agree with Mrs. Morris that we believe that the cumulative impact of traffic from the three developments has been considerably underestimated by the developers. They did their surveys at the wrong time. Even in their original documents, their peak hours are wrong for Paddock Wood. The peak hours for Paddock Wood are not as per their survey. They tend to be earlier because we the larger number of the population. That first of all, initially it's the commuters who go very, very early, and then it's white van man who's trying to get to work for 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then it's White Van Man coming back at 4 o'clock along with the school run. And they did theirs according to sort of 9 to 5 office hours, which isn't appropriate for the area, which is why presumably they came up with such low figures. The other thing I think that has not been covered in the allocations is there is no policy to actually increase the, as it were, the number of roads in the area or the cumulative impact of the new residential areas will impact on existing roads, some of which are effectively glorified country lanes and the rest of which are residential side streets. I think that there's no plan to have a new access to that side of the town, which might have mitigated the negative traffic effects that we're going to be facing if these 3 sites go ahead. I noticed that Berkeley have submitted a junction improvement proposal for Badsall Road and Maidstone Road junction, and I can see that has some value. It will also it does cover one of the issues there, which was that the people who the residential area that abuts to that junction was going to be quite badly hit, and it now looks as if that will be protected, and I would welcome that. But as I say, that without, as Councillor Moon mentioned, without a master plan to look at this in the whole, it does seem that these issues are not going to be covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, CPRE.
I'd like to talk about, firstly, about the effect of what is going to happen in Paddock Wood on the residents of the surrounding villages. Paddock Wood serves as the town that serves East Peckham in Tunbridge Malling, Laddingford and Collier Street, and perhaps to some extent Yalding in Maidstone, Brenchley and Horseman Den, Matfield, Five Oak Green and Capel, and to some extent perhaps also Pembury. There is going to be the best part of 1,000 new dwellings provided at Paddock Wood. And I can see no indication that public car parking is going to increase at all. In fact, because of the development of the Tesco site that at the moment seems to be providing some temporary-ish car parking, it's likely that the public car parking will reduce, at least while that site's being developed. So the residents of those areas who currently rely on being able to drive into Paddock Wood are going to find they can't. Now, some of those have reasonably regular bus services. Some of them have a bus service, such as Brenchley, on 3 days a week. And you only have just over an hour between the bus getting to Paddock Wood and having to get back. So the effect of a failure to provide extra public car parking to take account in the town centre, to take account of the extra development that's taking place on the periphery, is going to be severe on the surrounding villages. Also, we have expressed our concern about the wording of the policies, and I only mention it now because it is really about infrastructure, particularly the question of community facilities. The wording is whether they can be provided will be explored. Well, that's all very well. That doesn't really commit the developers to actually providing these facilities. They can explore it and everyone can say, oh, well, it's not really possible, not really viable on our site. And we're going to end up with all these developments and perhaps no community facilities. And one example, for instance, is that there is currently no swimming pool in Paddock Wood. So residents of Paddock Wood who want their children to learn to swim have to go to Cranbrook or Tunbridge Wells through the North Farm estate, or they have to go to Tunbridge or to Larkfield. And they are going to have all these new attenuation ponds, and the children know where to learn to swim. I won't repeat the arguments made by the other people who've spoken, but I would strongly endorse what's been said about traffic.
Thank you very much. So, moving across to this side of the room, I've got a direct request to speak from Persimmon, Berkeley, Ryden, and I'd be grateful if you could address your remarks to the issues raised by community representatives. Now, can I just check from an agency perspective? Does Kent County Council have an interest here from a highways?
I'm definitely prepared to respond to the developers' points of view.
Okay. I would be very grateful to have that, and I think the best way to do it will be to kind of bring you in at the end alongside the Borough Council, just before the Borough Council, if you're content with that. So, Persimmon, then Ryden, then Berkeley, please.
Thank you. Picking up on the concern about there not being a master plan in place to cover all three sites, and in particular the concern about the infrastructure provision as a result. Again, we're in a slightly different situation because of the advanced nature of the planning applications that have been with the council for just under a year and just over a year at present. And during the course of the applications, and one of the reasons why they haven't been determined as yet is because there has been continuing ongoing discussion on that very issue. And I can give some comfort to the extent that we are being asked to ensure that the infrastructure that has been put forward through the Section 106 agreements will ensure that the wider town's requirements are properly catered for. As an example, that does include the highway situation, where as part of our transport assessment, we've been required to obviously consider the impact of the other application site at Church Farm. Also more recently, we've been required to consider the combined impact with the Berkeley site as well. And as Kent County Council will hopefully be able to confirm, we have now had confirmation that there is satisfaction that with the proposals being put forward, the highways can accommodate either the two existing applications coming forward themselves, or with the additional Berkeley scheme as well, that there is the agreed capacity to do so. I think with regards to comments about whether different peak hour surveys should have been undertaken, obviously we undertook the traffic assessments in the standard required way, and they've been scrutinised by the County Council, and obviously if we were required to change anything, we would have done so, but they've been satisfied with what's been put to them in that respect, and hence we haven't undertaken any amendments to them. We think they are sound in that respect. I think that's probably all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just endorse the comments that Mr. Meader has made. You appreciate that we submitted an application in cooperation and in coordination with Persimmon Homes to address combined impacts. So there were a lot of detailed discussions which took place, and consistent evidence base in terms of the submission material. Mr. Mead also responded to the issue on traffic surveys. Well, just to restate, really those were carried out in a robust way to standard industry requirements. and agreed by the County Council. I think to some extent the Borough and the County may wish to respond on this point in terms of their own evidence base, but in terms of the work we've done for the application, that is robust and includes comprehensive proposals for highways and accessibility and travel planning. I think related to that, there were some concerns about the likelihood of usage of the pedestrian and cycle routes to the station, and also about loading onto existing parking facilities, increased parking requirement. Just to make the point that the great advantage, particularly of the Church Farm site, is its proximity to the station, the town centre and facilities, and there's no doubt that that will impact on the propensity to walk and cycle because the distances are so short. And that's all I think at the moment, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. This will be a double act, myself first and then Mr Young specifically on the transport. I'd like, sir, just to pick up on the point about, there's been a couple of mentions this morning about windfalls and whether or not we really need this scale of development. By allocating, obviously the Mascalls Farm site is a later allocation that was introduced in February, March. But it does provide the opportunity now to provide for improved infrastructure and coordinated infrastructure across the town as a whole. And Mr Young will talk about that in the context of the highways, and Persimmon Homes mentioned this just earlier. In terms of scale of development as well, we've heard mention this morning of windfalls. Windfalls, and so we've heard reference of windfalls, and also that the cumulative impact of those windfalls in terms of on the infrastructure. If we have 10 sites of 10 units coming forward, you'll still end up with 100 units. And the impact of those units and the people occupying that on the local infrastructure. What you won't get with those 10 sites coming forward are the commensurate provision of and delivery of infrastructure improvements, because it's below the threshold that's required to provide for affordable housing, for financial contributions to doctors' surgeries and schools and so on and so forth. And so therefore it's only with the large planned scale of large-scale development that you actually get and secure the delivery of the infrastructure that's required, and also those betterment opportunities as well. Just in terms of that, the Berkeley Homes scheme will be providing for a package of on-site infrastructure improvements, but also financial contributions to off-site, some of which are in combination with the adjoining allocations, but also other contributions to other facilities in the town. And I'll pass over to Mr Young now with regard to transport.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll just summarise, if I can, the work we've been doing, and then try and address a couple of the points raised in doing so. We've been specifically working quite closely with Kent County Council over the last year to look at the impact of the Mascalls Farm development in addition to the other two sites, specifically on two junctions. First of all, the Coltshill roundabout, the Badsell Road and the A228, and specifically the Badsell Road, Mascalls Court Road, staggered junction. The work we've been doing has effectively relied on using the traffic data from the other two sites' transport assessments to effectively be our base with those development traffic added. That's a position we've agreed with Kent County Council, and throughout the process it's never been queried in terms of whether that data is valid or not. So from that we've assumed that Kent have done their own scrutiny of that data and considered it to be acceptable. Using other people's data, obviously we'd scrutinise that ourselves, and we've been through it and we're happy that it's robust as well. So in simple terms, we've added the potential development traffic from Mascalls Farm to that data to do our work on those two junctions. The end results basically in very basic terms. The Coltshill roundabout, we've provided a increased capacity solution to accommodate all three development sites, which has been accepted in principle by Kent County Council at the end of October of this year. And
With the Badsall Road, Mascos Court Road junction, that's been more of a challenge. We've looked at a number of options to do with retaining a staggered junction, adding more capacity, and a whole range of different signal phasing options. The position we reached with Kent is we couldn't find a solution that they were happy with, so we've now looked at a crossroad signalised junction solution, because obviously we have land within the Mascos Farm site that we can bring to bear, so that a realigned Badsall Road would line up with Mascos Court Road. That is a solution we arrived at, and through various different modelling scenarios we agreed an in principle acceptable position with Kent at the end of November. That's about all I've got to say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Right. Can I come to Kent County Council?
Thank you very much.
And if you're able to, I guess, comment on the technical issues that have been raised, that would be particularly helpful.
I will do. Thank you. As you know, we've had the two planning applications that have been submitted and extensive pre-application discussions with Mascos Farm. So we've had the opportunity to quite thoroughly assess the transport issues associated with these three sites. We've had discussions around bus service improvements, footway and pedestrian crossing improvements, cycleway improvements and public right-of-way improvements, and of course the two main junctions that this additional traffic would affect. We're now in a good position of having two proposals that we are in principle happy with that achieve nil detriment. So the first proposal would allow Church Farm and Mascos Court Farm traffic to achieve nil detriment. And the second lot of proposals would also allow the third site of Mascos Farm to take place. Therefore, we've got no reason to believe that the normal planning process and subsequent legal agreements can't deliver the improvements required to make these three sites acceptable.
Are there any particular issues that emerged for you from, for example, Mrs. Morris's commentary, which had raised concern that maybe peak hour was being modelled at the wrong time because of the very particular geographical location of Paddock Wood and its demographic?
The beneficial position of having two planning applications in is that we've quite thoroughly been able to assess those submissions, and we are happy that the information provided is what is required and reflects the local situation.
So, in short, and in technical terms, you wouldn't raise a flag over any of the data that's been put in front of you at all?
No, we've had the two applications in for nearly a year now, and there has been significant toing and froing to make sure that the application is robust, and we're happy with it as it stands. Okay.
Right, I'll come to the Council. Mr Hinton, is this you again?
Thank you. Just a few points. The question of the master plan, if I understood it correctly, was a suggestion that a master plan for the whole of Paddock Wood has been promoted at some stage, and unless I've misunderstood, our reference to master planning in the document is master planning of the individual sites, although obviously in considering those sites we've taken a holistic view of what's happening in Paddock Wood and the implications of those three sites coming forward for Paddock Wood. So the reference to master planning is to individual sites. You will also have noted in our documentation that...
And can I just briefly clarify there so that everybody in the room is on the same page on that? It's master planning for individual sites as part of the planning application preparation process. So the first stage at which you'd expect to see that would be alongside an outline application?
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
The point about infrastructure has been talked about, and various people have commented on that. It is the case, as I mentioned earlier, that the fact that there has been active pre-application and subsequent application discussion between the Borough Council and the various promoters of development has enabled us not only to engage with the various agencies that we would normally engage with in order to identify what infrastructure is required, and whether that's KCC as the county health issues or whatever. We obviously would do that as part and parcel of preparing the plan. But also the fact that discussions on detail have advanced to the stage that they have has enabled us to be more specific in what we believe the infrastructure requirements coming forward from the individual sites and cumulatively should be. And that in turn has allowed us to put forward revised policy wording, which we think is clearer in terms of what we expect. Lastly, mention has been made of parking provision in the town. You will see in the document that there are references to existing parking provision being safeguarded, as well as individual development proposals washing their own face, so to speak, in terms of individual parking provision requirements vis-à-vis the various developments. If there is a need to review overall parking provision in the town, that is a matter that would be picked up as part of the local plan review, which, as you know, sir, is already ongoing. And one of the pieces of work that we envisage carrying out early in the new year is to look again at the function and services at individual settlements, and the issue of parking would form part of that assessment.
Would you be prepared to go further than a might to a will? Because I get the impression that there are people sitting in this room who might go away feeling a bit happier if you were actually able to say that in the local plan review we will examine the specific infrastructure requirements of Paddock Wood as an enlarged settlement, and as part of that we'll carry out a study of parking need and look at the way that can be addressed in plan policy moving forward.
In terms of the first part of that sentence, yes, I can categorically say we would have done that in any event, and if it assists, I can again take the opportunity to confirm that would include parking provision in the town.
Okay, right. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, I suspect these are matters that are going to rest in the umpire's basket. We're not going to have a mass outbreak of agreement again. But my sense is that in terms of the opportunity that's been provided for people here to orally put their positions and to hear responses from all of the relevant agencies and promoters of the allocation sites, I think a reasonably full opportunity has been provided to deal with the infrastructure issues, and I've also had an opportunity to explore the issues, the views that have been put to me that will assist me greatly when I go away and consider all of the written materials I have to consider as I write my report. So I'm going to propose that we actually move on now in the agenda to what was a kind of overarching item about whether the sites proposed to be allocated in Paddock Wood are sound, and in this respect to move beyond just the major housing allocations to the allocations proposed for the town more generally. So this does provide an opportunity for Tesco to join the debate. When we have covered that, we will need to review changes to policy wordings. Now, the council are proposing some changes to policy wordings and also proposing some policy map changes to bring about some additional areas of landscape buffer. Mr. Corse, I think that'll be the place where we can best get back into this issue between yourself and Ryden Homes about where attenuation basins might be located, whether sufficient land is indicatively being provided, or whether there's a need to deal with things differently from the way that's being suggested in the plan. Okay, so in terms of general points on soundness around allocations, not just of a housing nature, can I see indications? Now, that is Folhurst Wood, and Mr. Songhurst, that's much better. I can now see your Paddock Wood Town Council, the Labour Party, Mr. Corse, and Mrs. Morris. Who has? We've got Tesco on this side. Are the other developers? Yeah. Why do? Okay. Well, I'll take a watching brief. Are there any points likely to arise from agencies or the county on this item? No. Okay. Well, again, I'll leave the council to the end, as is my normal process. What I'm going to do, though, this time is I'm going to go to Tesco first, and then I'm going to go to the community representatives. My reason for so doing is that if there are things that Tesco say, community representatives and then the town council will be able to factor in responses to those, having heard what Tesco have said. So, Tesco, would you like to open the batting on this one?
Thank you, sir. May I just point out that whilst we are instructed by Tesco, you rightly acknowledged by way of correspondence that actually the status of the land interest in the town centre is under a little bit of uncertainty, and I should just raise the point that, as I say, whilst we're instructed by Tesco, it could be said that we're also representing the interest of the party that was selected by our client to promote the site going forward. I just thought it was right for everyone participating that they're aware of who we are and why we're here.
Fair comment. And noted.
We'd not actually planned to attend this session because our client and the purchaser of much of what is the town centre allocation are actually quite satisfied by the structure and content of that policy. But as you're aware, the council's hearing statement has led to some fairly significant changes to the drafting of the policy. If I may just summarise, the submission version of the policy was focused on mixed-use redevelopment of the town centre, and to quote that policy, that residential on upper floors was entirely acceptable as long as it remains supplementary to other uses that may come forward within that site. We're now in a slightly different place because the changes proposed by the council suggesting that residential development will only be acceptable, and so there is an inherent test now within the policy, only be acceptable as part of a comprehensive and mixed-use approach, which will also provide for a master-planned approach to the redevelopment of Paddock Wood Town Centre. And so I think we were sort of justified in a sense in reserving our position on whether to speak because of the change that has now been made. And we would like to raise concerns on two counts, the justification for that change and also some concerns about the impact on the deliverability of the town centre allocation. The council's explained that Paddock Wood is capable of taking additional growth, and we have no doubt in that. But clearly, infrastructure, local community provision, retail and other services and facilities are recognised as an issue for many of the parties that are here today. The Council's hearing statement explains that the allocation of an additional site is effectively why the Council has decided to review the town centre policy, because there is an interrelationship between the 900 or so homes that are proposed and what may or may not need to happen in the town centre. We're not here at all to object to any of those allocations, But we are slightly concerned that there hasn't been sufficient attention paid to the role of the existing urban area in delivering some of the housing needs that have been identified. For example, are there opportunities to decant existing uses away from sites in the centre? And indeed, has the council completely ruled out the opportunities provided, for example, by the Network Rail site just to the south of the railway station? And most importantly, to what extent has the council considered the extent to which the town centre allocation could itself deliver a fairly significant amount of housing if higher densities were seen to be appropriate, as I would suggest a town centre site with the sustainable credentials that this site has. And of course, even a small increase in brownfield housing might be said to dilute the requirement for such extensive extensions elsewhere. I should point out, as maybe knowledge on the ground, that our client is disposing of the site and an extensive marketing exercise was carried out, and I can confirm that there was no interest at all from any retailers, whether national or local. In fact, the primary source of interest was from specialist housing developers, mainly retirement housing developers. Those offers were rejected in preference for a mixed-use residential developer, a company called South East Living. They were represented here this morning by one of their directors. Unfortunately, he's had to leave, but I just wanted to make that point that they are obviously keen to understand what's going on. They are concerned, however, that the changes are built on relatively poor justification, flowing from the additional residential allocations and perhaps a lack of reality about to the extent to which an enhanced retail offer can be delivered in a town like Paddock Wood. And that is despite, of course, the marketing exercise that has only just been completed, which didn't show any real retail or commercial interest. I must point out that the allocation of a large area of the town centre has been present since the 2006 local plan, with no sort of notable progress or success, even when Tesco was trying to acquire sites in the last 3 or 4 years to bring that together. One might say, of course, that was because it was Tesco, not a mixed-use developer, but clearly they have struggled. In terms of what we would like to see here, we would firstly invite the council to simply revert to the policy as it was drafted. We think that it provided a platform for suitable mixed-use redevelopment and a degree of flexibility. But if the council persists with the approach in which it's trying to enhance the retail and commercial aspects of the delivery of that site, we would invite you, sir, to impose safeguards, 3 of which, first, to actually force the council to lead the master plan process. There are something like 16 different land interests forming the allocation in the town centre. The disposal to South East Living being just one of those. And clearly there will be a need for many parties to come together, and clearly the district and the town council probably have a very significant role in the master plan. So I think the emphasis on who carries out that master planning exercise needs to be made clear. Secondly, given the significant number of interests, is there a need for compulsory acquisition to be referred to in the policy? Not necessarily directly, but just to give an indication of the council's appetite to do so in order to bring forward the relevant pieces of land. And then thirdly, to reintroduce text that recognises the importance of housing delivery on that site in order to make it a viable development, i.e. our view is that yes, there is an opportunity for additional commercial and retail floor space, but to make that viable there will need to be a component of housing, and its importance seems to have been diluted somewhat. And finally, sir, notwithstanding those requests, justification for a more prescriptive policy, as the council seems to be following, flows from the additional allocations proposed for Paddock Wood, and if the third of those should fail, then surely in any event the policy should revert to the one that was drafted at the submission stage.
Is a clear and simple summary, as I see it, of the written material that's been put to me. So I don't have any further questions on that, but I obviously will provide the council with an opportunity to respond to it once others have said their piece. Now, in terms of others saying their piece, don't feel constrained just to address that site. It's your opportunity to address the town. And so in terms of the order here, rather than go to Mrs. Morris first this time, just in terms of redistribution, what I'm actually going to suggest is we go to Mr. Moon first, then Folhurst Wood, then Mr. Corse, then Mrs. Morris, and then finally come to the Town Council. So, Mr. Moon.
Thank you, sir. My comments address really on PW3 and PW4. If you take the consultation process in March 2015, that was based purely on the soundness and justification of the previous document. And I have concerns because the original consultation in March 2013, PW4 was not actually, as I put it, on the table. There were various reasons why it wasn't considered to be a good place to have new development. Consequently, between that, there was no actual consultation on that allocation. The only time that appears is in the present hearing we've got now and the present consultation, but that is restricted in only addressing the soundness and the justification and all the other tests. So I feel that was a bit unfair for the residents of Paddock Wood to actually put their points of view across. Now, when it comes to the actual soundness and again a justification of that additional allocation of PW4, again I have concerns, because if it was based on the 2013 consultation, then if you look at the submissions, the majority of those from residents in Church Farm and around the areas of Green Lane that would be affected directly by those developments, the residents that lived around the Badsall Road area maybe well have thought, well, it's not part of the allocation, so we won't make a submission. And I have this worry that the addition of PW4 was basically based on maybe comments made by people on that consultation that it wasn't a good idea necessarily to have it at Church Farm or at Green Lane, Master's Court Lane, but maybe Badsall Road may be a better place to put that new development. And that is not just me saying this is documented in comments made by the actual residents concerned. So on that basis I have concerns of it. And the other, just a quick point, is that when you try to analyse between 2013 and March 2015, there does not appear to be any documentation or minutes of any meetings that Tunbridge Wells Borough Council made a decision to include PW4 on the allocation. But I would like to make this point exceptionally clear. I don't think the allocation on all three sites is justifiable. They are all, I consider, unsound and unjustified because the issues we've raised between the flooding, traffic management, etc., affect all three sites. I consider 950 a big number for Paddock Wood to cope with. Considering the borough's response, to ask Paddock Wood to take that amount with no master plan in place, no forward thinking, there's been sort of dissatisfaction raised already maybe by the other agencies, that it's unsound in its basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moon. Now, if I can come to Mr. Songhurst.
Thank you very much, sir. This has been a fascinating process, watching what's been going on around here. Because there's been a number of comments that have been the most honest comments I've heard in 15 months of this process. In 2010, a target was set by the council that there were going to be 600 houses in Paddock Wood. They went through 2 public consultations to the public, to the community, saying, where do you want these houses? In 2013, they decided that there were 2 sites, Church Farm and Maskell's Court Farm. There were various reasons why they thought the one next to Folhurst Wood would not be suitable, and ecology came into it as a large factor. We all went along in the community thinking there's going to be 600 houses here. And in December 2014, the council makes a decision that we ain't having 600, we're having 1,000. Where did this come from? Where did they suddenly get that figure from? Suddenly, we've gone from 2 sites to 3 sites. No public consultation, just made out of thin air. And as Councillor Moon has said, I think I know where it came from. There was a group in October 2014 called the Planning Policy Working Group. This is a collection of councillors and planning officers. They met, they had a chat, they kept no minutes of their meeting, but they came up with a recommendation that ALPW4 should be a new policy, and that the land that Berkeley Homes want to build on next to Folhurst Wood should come back into the equation. But they kept no written records of how they made that decision, what factual information backed it up. It was just plucked out of thin air, from all I can see. How can you have a situation in the 21st century, in a Western democracy, when a decision as important as planning is made by a small group that keep no records of what they actually did and said? And I sent that information to you, sir, on the 21st of March. The most honest comment I've heard in here is Mr. Edwards. How have we got to a situation that we've gone from 600 to 1,000 homes? And as Mr. Edwards said, Berkeley Homes understand that to get the infrastructure through, we need the money, and the money has to come from 3 developers, not 2. And that's an honest statement, I think, is where it's come from. And I'm thinking, I know where this has come from now. The only way that Tunbridge Wells Borough Council can get this through is that they need... Sorry. Do you want me to start again?
Just do that last sentence
again,
please.
The honest statement I think that Mr. Edwards made was that the way that 3 developments are getting through this town and the way that 1,000 houses are getting into this town is because they need 3 developers on board to get the funding, to get the infrastructure through. And so, we've gone from a position of 2013 where 2 sites were coming forward to a position of 2015 where we need the money to get the infrastructure put in, and the wildlife that's associated with ALPW4 and Folhurst Wood is going to be sacrificed. Now, you may sit and think, Mr. Summers, you're just making that up. But talking of making up, we've heard the council today suddenly out of thin air say, oh, I'll tell you what, we're going to have a flood forum. Where did that one come from? I'm sitting next to the Paddock Wood Town Council representative thinking, I've never heard of this before. We then have a situation where the CPRE say, well, we need more car parking. And the council say, oh yeah, we might think about that. We've had 5 years of a process of which this is all meant to have been worked out, and they're making it up on the hoof. I just don't see how this is a sound process. Because it's being made up dependent upon pressures that are being put in, and that we now know from Mr. Edwards, it's down to the money. The only way we're going to get all this infrastructure, which presumably is needed for all these houses, is because they need 3 developers on board. I think it's totally unsound that after 5 years of talking to the public, we said, nobody in Paddock Wood has said we want 1,000 houses, and yet they're saying that's what you're getting. How can we go 5 years through a process of which we're being misled on what's going on, and we're not being told the honest truth, and secret groups are being set up that don't keep any records of what they're making, how they're making their decisions, and we get dumped on at the end? That's what's happening in this process. And if that's a sound process, well...
And that's it. Powerful and to the point. Okay. Mr. Corse, please. And Mr. Songhurst, if you can just pop your...
Well, I agree quite a lot with what Mr. Songhurst said. We started off with when we were working out the core strategy back in 2010 or even 2006, Paddock Wood was going to be allocated 400 houses. Somehow that got put up to 600, and I've never seen any justification for that bit. 600 was, okay, we'll put up with that. And various housing allocations have gone through since, and we had 130 of those, which brings it down to 470. And people were beginning to think, well, we could probably cope with that as well. And then suddenly, this document comes out, there's 950, or there's 971. The figure seems to be changing, it's fluid. And where's the justification? We haven't seen any justification, certainly in the documents I've seen. There's no improvement in services or infrastructure. It looks as though it works the other way around. Build the houses, the infrastructure follows. Hopefully, it hasn't in the past. I think that's really the basis of what I have to say. It's gone from 470 to 950, or maybe more. That's a 102% increase on what we were expecting. We're taking some of what Tunbridge Wells and Southborough shouldn't have had in some of their allocations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corse. And again, if you can just pop your signal down, and I will come to Mrs. Morris.
Obviously, again, I'm in agreement with a lot of what Mr. Songhurst has said. If I could actually quote some actual figures, yes, the core strategy, we're looking at 2007, when we had 600 houses. Now, since that date, approximately 150 new homes have either been built or planning permission has been given. In fact, 7 last night. That leaves a balance of about 450. And if we were going to accept 600 houses, that's what we should be expecting. That's one development, not 3. We're now looking at a figure of 975 plus. And I say plus because we know as developments go up, what sells best gets built. So we could be looking at a higher figure. Now, if my maths are reasonably okay, we're looking at somewhere around 1,150 new homes. Now, the original figure of 600 was 10% of the borough's allocation. They have in paragraph 25 of their most recent document, in response to matters and issues, they state the over-allocation of 6.8%. I think that's very misleading. 600 to 1,150 is 20%. That's a 10% increase. So we are being expected to accommodate 20% of the borough's allocation. And I agree with Mr. Corse that that's because they're now not going to be in Tunbridge Wells or Southborough. I think it's unsound because we have too many issues in Paddock Wood which need to be addressed before such a large allocation can be made.
Thank you very much. Now, the Town Council.
I'm not going to repeat what Mrs. Morris has said, which I agree with 100%, as does the Town Council. The Town Council sees no justification for this over-allocation of the total to Paddock Wood. What I did want to address was the Borough Council's proposed change to the policy for the town centre, i.e. the Tesco's land. The town council has aspirations for Paddock Wood. They want to see Paddock Wood improved. It's generally accepted, I think, that the town centre it's functional, but it doesn't actually add a lot to the ambience of the town. And the view the town council has taken over the last couple of years is that if there is to be more housing in Paddock Wood, the town centre needs to be improved to accommodate services, whether they be retail or other, that increased community will need. I think, bearing that in mind, that is why the Borough Council has tried to tighten up the policy regarding that allocation. Obviously, it does make it harder for a developer that buys that land to develop it if they have to actually take into consideration the whole town centre and other areas, other pieces of land that they don't own. But the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean that the town doesn't deserve to have that need addressed. The town council is in the process of setting up a neighbourhood plan. The policies that will be included in that neighbourhood plan will hopefully address some of the requirements for an improved town centre, and they will certainly be able to work in conjunction with Tunbridge Wells Borough Council in devising a master plan that will make that town centre fit for purpose going forward with an increased population. And I think that would be the case irrespective of whether one, two or all three of these sites are ultimately allocated for housing. Obviously we don't want the existing policy took the risk that the developer would come in and effectively hollow out the town centre by simply concentrating on the housing aspect of the site and not actually adding anything to the sort of town centre offer overall. I think this is it tallies with the policies that have been going back several years, various borough policies, various adopted plans, infrastructure plans and so forth have identified the need for the town centre to be improved, and nothing really much has happened. And obviously what they're trying to do with this is make sure that this time round that issue is finally sorted out. And I think in conjunction with a neighbourhood plan, this is an opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would generally agree with the other things that have been said.
Right. I note all of those positions, and once again, thank you very much for your contribution. So I'll come then finally to the Borough Council. Who's leading on this? Mr. Toffs.
Yes, thank you, sir. I was going to address comments in relation to the town centre policy. In terms of the changes to that policy, the intention behind the changes in our statement, PS 47, was it had a number of elements really. It was, as has been said, to sort of tighten up the policy with regards to town centre uses. The introduction of a master plan that wording was to follow similar policy wording in other chapters, and mindful of the previous discussions we've had about areas of change in Royal Tunbridge Wells Town Centre. In relation to the Borough Council's approach to master planning, we have, through one of our modifications, proposed changes in the Royal Tunbridge Wells chapter with regards to that and the role that the Borough Council would take. We can also look for a similar kind of wording in the Paddock Wood chapter to express a similar wish to drive that process forward.
Now, just to be clear, in very brief summary terms, for those who weren't here for the strategic sessions where this was covered, and also the Royal Tunbridge Wells Town Centre sessions where this was covered, this was a conversation that essentially addressed the need to clarify who would lead in a master planning exercise if, as representations for Tesco were expressing concern about, in a complex situation with lots of landowners, for example, it wasn't naturally coming from the site, and making clear that the council would lead. Now, that some words have been developed that the council are happy to promote as a change to the Tunbridge Wells chapter that would take that on board. And so, Mr. Tofts, you're saying you'd accept the same words here?
Yeah, I would suggest a similar form of wording for the Paddock Wood chapter as for the Tunbridge Wells chapter in one of our additional statements.
Yes. Yeah. Just trying to remember which one it was.
So was I.
It would be the Royal Tunbridge Wells. It will either be matter D, or it might be one of the strategic ones. I'm just trying to remember which one it was. No. Anyway, put something forward, and people can no doubt respond to it.
Yes, thanks. I understand from a colleague it was in matter D2.
Matter D2.
That was put forward.
So if people want to look on the website, the council statement for matter D2 sets out an approach. Now.
Points were made about neighbourhood planning, and we would certainly welcome the opportunity to work with the town council and landowners and others in that process. Several of our statements address the process of neighbourhood planning, and you'll be aware, sir, that the most advanced neighbourhood plan within this borough is at Hawkhurst, and we as a borough council have put in significant resources to help the parish council at Hawkhurst with their neighbourhood plan, and we will do the same in Paddock Wood. As regards the uses in the amended policy PW1, as I say, it was our concern that it needed to be tightened up and more specifically address town centre uses. Also, we had some indication from our viability consultants that a flatted development might raise questions of viability, and that more retail development might prove more viable. But so that was the reason for wording as regards the housing point. But if that could be addressed in a revision to the wording that would satisfy landowners, then we would be open to those discussions, subject to our concerns about the town centre approach, really. So that, I think, is all the points I had. But
Can I just speak briefly then about the process there? Because if you're thinking about floating some possible amendments to that policy to address points that have been raised around the table here, we need to know when those might appear. And I think we're also going to need a process, given that we're rapidly running out of hearings at which people can appear, whereby, maybe by way of written representations, people could respond to something that you were proposing that can come in after the end of hearings. So my suggestion would be that if you were able to put together a paper on roughly the same, I'm looking at the same sort of timescales as some of the other matters that we have been working on. So if you could put a paper together that indicated that the wording approach that you take to PW1 by the 11th, would that be achievable?
Yes, I'm sure that would be achievable, sir.
And then representors could respond to it by, say, the 24th. Horrible day, I know, but... And then if the council felt that there was anything in the light of points made in writing by representors that they needed to raise again, they could put concluding remarks to me by the 8th of the 1st. That's the same timescale as a number of the other pieces of written work that the council are working on. Would people be happy with that as a process? And obviously conversations can happen before the 11th. Okay, that's what we'll do.
Yes, my only other comments on that policy was some of the changes are to try and address concerns that have been expressed about public parking on the site as well. That is really all I have to say on that policy, really.
Thank you very much. Now, to Mr. Hinton.
Thank you, sir. Just on the other more strategic matters, just very briefly, you will be aware that obviously there has been discussions as part of the examination in terms of the role of Paddock Wood in meeting the housing needs of the borough, and that's been discussed and is in submissions which have already been debated before you, sir. So I don't need to repeat those, but they are documented. Obviously, as a responsible planning authority, the council has sought at all stages of the preparation of the document not only to meet its legislative and procedural requirements and particularly in regard to public consultation, but wherever possible to go beyond that in how it carries out its planning responsibilities. And I suspect that we will just have to agree to disagree with some of the comments that have been made. Clearly it's disappointing to hear that certain people feel that they haven't been engaged. But for instance, the issue of the local plan review is clearly stated in the submission document as an intent, and therefore that hasn't been disguised. Equally, the promotion of free sites has a history. It hasn't just suddenly arrived at today, and indeed it is part of the ongoing process that parties are able to come to the examination hearings and present their concerns to you, sir, and that is part of the process in concluding the plan. So, as I say, I don't think we will reach agreement here, and it's for you to weigh those matters in the balance.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm conducting another time check because I'm conscious of the fact we've got a quarter of an hour before I said we must break for lunch, because we must break for lunch then if we're going to have any. And I'm looking at the remaining items on the agenda, and considering that we're about to move to a new one, I don't think there's any way known to humanity that we will finish that properly in a quarter of an hour. So I was actually going to float a different way of cutting the cake. What I was actually going to float is that we actually stop now, that if people are amenable to the idea of coming back after lunch, and I think sensibly that would have to be at 10 to 2, if that could be achieved. So it's slightly longer than a half-hour lunch break, but not by very much. Back at 10 to 2, and we can then take 40 minutes to review the final agenda items, which is a lot fuller and I think does more justice to the issues than attempting to run at them in 15. I say 40 minutes because we can't steal too much time from the Crane Valley and Cranbrook, where there are equally serious issues that must be given equal attention to. Now, putting that to everybody who's assembled here, I'm also conscious that a number of the agencies may not consider they have a great deal to contribute to the later parts of the agenda. So if you wish to leave, that would be sufficient. What are the thoughts around the table? Sensible? Prepared to do it on that basis?
Could you just clarify, sir, the actual particular area you wish to review in the 40 minutes?
What we'll be talking about next, the items remaining on my agenda are number 4, which I don't think is necessarily going to take much time because most people's submissions have already covered it. It's given the scale of proposed housing allocations, what are the implications for Paddock Wood, and for the plan as a whole and the implementation of the core strategy. Now, that's something that a lot of people have already spoken to. But number 5 was an opportunity to look at detailed changes to policy wordings. Now, given that the Council have advanced a number, I think it would be most remiss to go past that, and I'm also conscious that that's where I was going to come to Mr. Corth, and that's where I was going to come to Ryden Homes on this issue about changes to landscape buffer in Church Farm. So we've got to talk about that, and then briefly a look at whether we need to consider any emission sites implications. So that's what I'm suggesting. Break now, return at 10 to 2. Mr. Corse.
If we're talking about the open space buffer, does that not involve the Environment Agency and the Internal Drainage Board?
Yes, I suspect it does. Although I think it does in the sense that, I mean, one of the matters that I've got to bear in mind in terms of deciding whether or not they can be released is that they have indicated that they're not concerned with the policies as they currently stand. And I take it you've seen the amendments that the Council are proposing.
No, I haven't actually.
Right. Look at them over lunch, and I'm afraid, do you mind staying?
Okay.
And could the Internal Drainage Board stay? Okay. I don't think we should discuss this for much longer because we're eating into the time we need to do the real talking. Let's stop now. Let's return at 10 to 2. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Excuse me, sir. Could I have an opportunity to come back then this afternoon on the points that have just been raised? I've had my Toblerone up.
You will.
Thank you.